Hi. I did not, but I can.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Let me get your email up and I'll get it ready and going.
I'm right there. If you have any questions.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay,
6:30.
and we're zooming it?
We are all zooming.
All right. Would it still not make sense to post 9 o'clock?
There
meeting
is
on
one already
Saturday?
posted.
Okay.
Would you bring wine out?
I'm assuming it's, can you make the motion?
Yes, and it has that
Oh,
language in it
yep.
that remember we
Can you
need.
go ahead and?
Yes, I move to appoint Nick Siruchek.
Sirachuk.
I move to appoint Nick Siruchek as an alternate member of the Shellfish Advisory Board for a 3-year term and after being sworn in by the town clerk for him to serve in compliance with the town charter and all applicable state and local laws, regulations, and policies.
Okay, second. Can I have a roll call vote?
John, I.
Barbara, I.
Ryan, I.
Michael, I.
Helen, I.
Okay.
Thank you.
And then I move to adopt the remaining items of the consent agenda as drafted.
Helen, second.
Okay, can I have a roll call vote, please?
John, I.
Barbara, I.
Ryan, I.
Michael, I.
Helen, I.
Okay. And so I hereby open the public hearing on grant license number 9515 held by Schooner and Lewin Grady.
Mr. Chair, I'll be recused from this.
Okay.
All right.
The Shellfish Constable Savetta.
Thank you. Schooner and Louine Grady have forfeited grant 9515 as far as the Shellfish Department, the Select Board, and the state are concerned, and in accordance with our regulations. I want the record to be clear as you enter your decision-making on this. The Shellfish Department had nothing to do with scheduling this public hearing. No one consulted with us nor with other members of the Select Board in making the decision to offer it. And there's no mechanism in our regulations to have provided it. It seems there was a misunderstanding of the Shellfish Department's work on the other minimum productivity notifications, which I tried to elucidate in my memo in tonight's packet. The clock starts ticking when we receive the green certified mail return receipts back, and the grant holders need to let Town Hall know they want a public hearing within 2 weeks of that date. All of the grant holders for your last public hearing called Town Hall or came in to request their public hearings without any issues. That said, the Shellfish Department staff did its best to prepare documentation for your packet tonight according to the regulations that the Select Board Chair had advertised. We tried to be succinct with what we included and to present it in an organized way so that it would be easy to understand. We included the annual reports as requested by the Select Board Chair at the last meeting. The town of Wellfleet has entrusted the Shellfish Department, and specifically me, when I was hired as the Shellfish Constable, to enforce the town's shellfishing policy and regulations. I'm concerned about the precedents being set with recent decisions. I liken it to the police pulling people over for speeding and issuing citations. If everyone took their citation to the judge and the judge let them off, then everyone would know it's okay to keep speeding. Why are the regulations even necessary at that point? Consistency is important, and it is the Shellfish Department's tenet. This is a very difficult position to be in. We try really hard to work with people so that we don't even get to this point. We pride ourselves on the mutually respectful relationships we've built through these discussions. We don't just hand out citations. We collaborate with people to improve their operations and ensure the long-term success of this industry. I'm looking to the Select Board to support the difficult actions that the Shellfish Department takes, which incur years of monitoring and countless hours of documentation to bring to you. This is not an easy task, but we are following the regulations in good faith, with great integrity, and with an immense burden of the responsibility of overseeing a $7.7 million shellfishing industry. That's the lifeblood of this town. My memo addresses the fact that this grant has not been productive for almost a decade, and that's all I'm going to say for now. If certain topics come up during this discussion, I'll have further details to share. I'm always available to answer any questions and to make further comments. Thank you for your time and consideration.
Okay, is the
Louine,
former license holders here?
Louine,
Luann?
It's William Young, Jr. I'm here to represent my stepmother, I'd say, I guess, adoptive mother. I moved to town in '83. She's been like a mother to me ever since. And we've been trying to get something going on this grant for quite a while. There's been a few major upsets in the doing so. She lost her husband, she's lost her son. She was here a few years ago before COVID with Schooner and got the same kind of a reprimand about not using the grant. COVID happened, Schooner hasn't done nothing. We know that. She did get registered mail. She didn't understand what she'd gotten. She'd had some operations, and I just think that was a kind of a odd way of taking somebody's grant. Nancy, was there any phone calls made to Louine and all this time of this hard work and everything made before,
yes.
prior to the letter being 2 weeks old? She didn't get no calls, no, you say you do a lot to help the community and
Yeah,
everything. There was no calls made to her. She has no
I s-
recollection of any calls saying the date was coming, you need to do this.
I had sent multiple, we've had multiple conversations through the
After
years
2
about
weeks-
this.
After the 2
but I did
weeks. I'm
not do
talking
it.
about the 2 weeks.
No,
the
I did
notice
not.
that-
No, because I had had many
So
more
if-
communications with her than I had had with anybody else to
Right,
date.
well, she was kind of surprised at the thing, and I think it was an odd way for the town or the Shellfish Department to try to yank a grant for somebody. We're not saying there's been a lot of productivity, but there is clams in the ground there. And if you're gonna refer it to like somebody getting a speeding ticket, at least the officer has a right to, and the person has a right to face the officer and know there's a problem before you default on your speeding ticket.
After 3
You know,
years,
just they don't just send a speeding ticket usually, you know, and say if you don't, you get guilty on it, you have a right to.
I feel like we did a lot of hand holding and
I
that
thank
we
you- I
worked
thank
a
you for
long
that.
time.
Please,
Could I
please,
raise
point
a
of order.
please? Please don't talk over.
Yep.
I'm sorry, it just totally comes all back to the department and.
Please,
and,
Mr. Young, I'd like to hear what you both have to say, but please don't talk at the same time, both
So
of
he
you.
was recognized, Nancy was not.
Okay,
So,
he asked her a question, but he didn't go through you.
okay. William Young,
Yeah,
okay.
Uh,
Miss,
you know, there's, I was going to, I wasn't aware of the deadline on the dates. I think she got her letter way before I got mine. Else I might not have known about mine either, but she did have the decency to come and find me and tell me she put the wrong address on mine. Mailing address. But she had the decency to come find me for mine, but I just think if she got this grant until 2024, I think this is just an odd kind of a curveball thing before the deadline of the grant was to expire. The lease was going to expire 24. I think she should at least have until then to make it right. And I vowed to help her out. I have the seed, the gear, the infrastructure to do everything to make all the qualifications for the last 10 years, excess of $1,000 an acre. And if the board would give her another chance at that, I would personally see that was done. That's what you're asking of you.
okay. Shellfish Constable Savetta,
So I would just say that I worked a long time with both Schooner and Louine, and it didn't go anywhere. And so I followed the regulations, and I just simply followed the regulations. As far as the department is concerned, by following the regulations, the grant is forfeited. And it sure doesn't feel good to say that, but it is what happened. And I think it's great for you to offer to help, but it's not the solution, unfortunately, in this case.
Okay. 1 minute. Ms. Eldridge, can you speak to some of the process as it played out in the administration's office? Or-
Sure. Nancy sent along an email or a phone call stating that there were certain grants that were going to have to be forfeited because there have been minimum productivity. She sent out a certified letter to each of them. They were to come to my office and give me, asked to be put on the Shellfish agenda for a hearing. You had set the hearing for May 24th. I heard from everybody multiple times because they didn't want to lose their hearing. I did speak to Louise. She was lovely, but it was long before that had happened. She had gotten her letter, I think in January, and there was no phone call from her ever. And except for, I think we spoke in March or April a few times, just explaining. And I know Jean McLaughlin spoke to Louise multiple times about it as well.
Okay, so this was the first license that was enforced on licensed area. As part of that, we realized that our record keeping was not great. If I could, there wasn't a formalized process as to recording when a hearing was requested. And there was a number of exchanges back and forth about that. So for the ones following this license, we
came up with a
Yep.
checklist.
Yes, we came up with a checklist so that we could record exactly when everything happened. So we had good documentation. Prior to that, it was verbal. The principal clerk has been on leave for a period of time. So we can't speak to exactly when different things may or may not have crossed her desk. It's likely that, this particular license, the request for a hearing came outside of the 14 days. However, a request was made. And previously the board had, when we had discussed about how we were going to handle the license or minimum productivity enforcement actions in the process for the forfeitures, at the time I had asked and informed the board that to be consistent with the rest of the regs, it would make sense to have a 30-day appeal period. All the other license appeal periods within the regulations are for 30 days. It's only in the minimum productivity that it is 14 days. This license holder, we do know that she did file or request an appeal, and that more than likely it happened before the 30 days. This is the first time that Wellfleet has been enforcing on minimum productivity for a number of years. I know it's been in the long-term, plans for the Shellfish Department to start, addressing these issues of licenses that are not being utilized, and to free them up for other town residents who might qualify to hold the licenses. If we are using an analogy of a officer pulling somebody over for speeding, very frequently, the first time you do that or the second time, they'll give you a warning, a written warning or a verbal warning. So it's just this is the first time that we really started enforcing on these heavily. And to me, there should be some allowance due to that factor. And that we do not have perfect records. And that, that all the other appeal periods contained within our shell fishing rules and regulations are for 30 days rather than the 14. And that's all I'll say. Helen?
Two things, and I didn't sort of start yelling at you with point of order, but I fully agree that we should change that amount of days in our shellfish regs. However, that is not what we're doing with tonight. That's the first thing I want to say. What we've got on the books now is a shorter period. But I want to remind everybody that back in March, this grant was forfeited. And I have to tell you, nobody walks on water for me. But the documentation of the bending over backwards and the kindness and the outreach way beyond what you would do just within the job on the part of the shellfish constable and also the rest of the department who supports these actions is meticulous, and it's more than that, it's kind. There's outreach that legally she wouldn't have to do. And this happened again and again. And when we came into the pandemic, which affected everybody, our shellfish constable did the right thing, which really legally she wasn't required to do. She said, this is a very difficult situation and I am not going to be enforcing in the same way because the people in the shellfish industry here are just knocked sideways along with everybody else. However, the lack of use of this grant and letting things go with no assumption about your life, Ms. Grady, but in my life, I'm getting older and I'm having to let a lot of things go that I used to do. And I've had to admit it. And I think that it can be the case and has been the case for years here that people have grants and they don't use them and they let somebody else use them. And the person who's named to the grant, the licensee, is no longer even around there. And there is something wrong with that. And letting this grant go, which has not been used in terms of productivity requirements for a long time before the pandemic. It's heartbreaking. Nobody's happy about this. But hey, guys, we accepted this forfeiture, which the Shellfish Department very kindly told us about.
So,
And
point of
excuse me,
information, 1 second.
in March. I'm
No.
looking at the record of that.
There was no motion to accept the forfeiture of there was never an agenda item for it.
But we only act on it when there's an appeal.
Yes.
There was no appeal back then. And through you
March
to Nancy
22nd, you
Chavetta.
guys voted that a forfeiture, excuse me for interrupting,
Yep.
but the select board voted on March 22nd, if I'm not mistaken, that a forfeiture was automatic, just like the
So-
regulations actually state, but you
Yep.
guys debated it and then
So-
decided that was so.
The motion was that, or the conclusion was that if an appeal was not filed on a timely manner.
Correct.
So I mean, for minimum productivity appeals, the shellfish rules and regulations, again, it says 14 days.
Correct.
If we want to discuss about some of the differences in the enforcement actions or the amount of outreach that was done regarding this license, we can. I don't know if that's the most productive conversation to have. But there are a number of, there was another license that hasn't been, there was at least one other license that hasn't been productive since 2017. So the same time period. And as this license, and we issued an order of conditions associated with that license. For a number of the license holders, Shellfish Department staff actually made the effort, which was admirable, of going out and visiting them in person. And over a period of time, did extensive efforts into educating those license holders as to what the appeal process was. Even before the letters for the minimum productivity went out, it's within the summaries that were provided for the minimum productivity hearings then. That included multiple phone calls with the license holders describing the actions the Shellfish Constable was contemplating, their rights, and how to utilize them. And then it also included additional letters that were certified mail, in addition to the minimum productivity determination letters, that these letters came before, and a number of emails, usually to everybody named to the license. This one was, as I said, again, this was the first one that was enforced on. I don't know. So, and yeah. William Young.
Yes, we was in one of the virtual meetings. She called the town hall. I think she called her maybe. She was under the impression, and I was.
Can you
under
just
the
speak into
impression-
the mic, please?
We were under the impression that we did have a date for a hearing. We sat there for hours on that. I think you could see us on that thing back before we did this. She thought, and I thought that was the hearing, but obviously, I guess we missed it. It was past the 14 days and we didn't really, she got told that the meeting would be on, I think it was the 7th or the 12th or whatever it was of March. We attended it virtually, but we never were called because we weren't on the agenda. But she was told that's when the meeting would be. When she called town hall, one of the numerous times that she either called or
Jean.
came to the town hall and visited them to try to get this taken care of. It's not that she didn't try. And we did think that we had a hearing, but we just sat there for nothing because we got told that it was the hearing, but it wasn't. It was a hearing, but not for her.
Ms. Savetta?
So this is another reason why these types of communications should go through the Shellfish Department, because we are the ones that would have communicated clearly. But I want to
Ms.
say a
Savetta,
couple of
Ms.
things.
Savetta, the appeal in the regulations is with the select board. It's not with the Shellfish Department. That is consistent throughout the regs. And that's why it is handled through the principal clerk's office. It is actually a charge of the principal clerk to maintain the shellfish shellfish documentation. It is not, the appeal is not with the Shellfish Department, it is with the select board.
I'm just talking about communication, because then I make sure people know if there's a breakdown in communication. That's all I'm saying. And I'd like to address some of the inconsistencies. The timeline on this, Jeannie Mack was in the office and working, and I walked into the office, as I put in my memo, on the 28th, which is the last day that you're supposed to pay your grant fees. And Louine was calling to pay her grant fees. And I asked Jeannie she told me what was going on, and she passed the phone to me. And I explained to Louine that it was too late, that she had missed the 14-day deadline. She was not calling at that time for a public hearing. She was calling to pay her grant fees. And then everybody wanted to try and help. And there were phone calls that were made, but that grant was forfeited and the documentation was provided to both Schooner and Louine. And, we've done everything correctly. If there's things that people want to change, then we should go to Shellfish Advisory and discuss them. I don't have a problem with that, but there was no documentation filled out at all for any of the 5 other people who got a certified mail and came in and just signed up with Rebecca. or made a phone call to Rebecca. There was no forms filled out. There was no paperwork, and it worked okay. I'm open to changes,
So,
but they're not
point of
to be discussed
information,
tonight.
Ms. Eldridge, can you talk about the records that you kept of when the other appeal, the other license holders that appealed, made their requests?
I had their letters of forfeiture from the Shellfish Constable. When they came in, it was either they came in or they called. When they did that, I put their names on the top of their letter. I highlighted it in a pink, and then I put the date of when they asked for that shellfish hearing, when they asked for the hearing. I told them all hearings were being held on May 24th. I told them what time, but I made sure that I wrote the date of when they came in to ask for the hearing.
So in that case, there is documentation of when the other license holders requested a public hearing, Ms. Tavetta.
Yes, but it wasn't the form. I'm sorry. I thought you were talking about the form that I saw got included in the packet tonight. I'm sorry that I misunderstood that. But Jeannie Mac would have done the same had Lueen called within, or Schooner. Schooner has not, we've not heard one word from Schooner. Nobody requested anything. Jeannie Mac was even more on top of it. And she would have let me know immediately. We corresponded about it. We spoke many times. I went into the office and spoke with her many times about it. So, you know, again, if things want to change in the future, we can look at that at Shellfish Advisory. But it wasn't like I just came out with this one letter. We gave many, many warnings going back 4 or 5 years. Johnny had been working with them before me. He put it on my radar as soon as I started. This is an issue that we are going to need to address. This had been going on for years with many warnings, many meetings in person, walks out to the grant together. I tried really hard. I probably had double amount the communication with the Grady's than I did with any of the 5 other grant holders that came up for minimum productivity, even though I did a lot more documentation. There was a lot more documentation in the, you know, in the last with the certified letters and stuff. But you see in your packet, there was multiple emails, there were letters, there were meetings. I tried really hard to make this work and to help them. And each of those other grant holders that came in for minimum productivity, even that one from 2017, they still sold us oysters for our buyback program for 2 years. If it's the person that I'm thinking about, they made some efforts. Every single one of those people made some efforts or had something. You all agreed to give them conditions because they had made some sort of effort.
Mr. Young and then Ms. Wilson.
Okay, is there records highlighted in pink of the dates that she called requesting a hearing?
She didn't ask me. I wasn't in the position.
If I may,
You're Rebecca?
Yes, but she didn't ask me. I wasn't in that position at that time. It was Jean McLaughlin who she spoke to. She only spoke to me in April, and that was long after it was forfeited.
We've been through
Right.
this back and forth. She's called there at least
Mhm.
a half a dozen times, all back in that time period.
Mhm.
But her dates are not highlighted by anybody?
There was no letter given to me at all with her thing.
You
She
said
had,
may I clarify, please?
Mhm.
Yep.
So it's because, Chopper, your stuff happened after. Hers was before when Jeannie was still there. So Jeannie knows what to do. I didn't need to work with Jeannie to bring her up to speed. And Lueen didn't call and within the 14-day time period,
That's not what I'm talking
after
about.
she called and after she spoke with Rebecca, way after, in March.
So Ms. Eldridge, is there any documentation as to when the first time the license holder might have requested a hearing to your knowledge?
no,
Okay.
Why?
Ms. Wilson?
Thank you. Through you to Ms. Grady, Lueen? Ms. Grady?
excuse me.
Yeah, I have a question. So, you and Schooner are both still named to that grant. You are both licensees to that grant, correct?
Yes,
However, when was the last time you held a propagation permit from the state?
It's all in
Um,
that bag.
It's in my bag there. Wasn't that long ago. I
Perhaps the Shellfish Constable knows.
they're
It was in.
holding one for me now.
So Mr. Young, Chopper, has kindly offered to make your grant productive, but right there, and the kindness is recognized by me, but right there, what we're looking at is the two people licensed to the grant are not actually working on it. And this was all prior to the pandemic. I already spoke about that. That changed things for everybody. And I'm going to say it again. Nobody is happy. I was not happy voting to, forfeit your grant, for the forfeiture for your grant because lack of production. We got good evidence of it. And this all
There was
happened.
never a vote.
I mean, not a vote. You're right, because actually it's not up to us. It's up to the Shellfish Department, and there had been no appeal. In other words, you didn't submit appeal back early in the spring about it. It didn't come in time. And you had been given documentation, you and Schooner. So neither one of you asked for an appeal, which is what we can vote on.
She
You're right,
did.
Brian.
She did ask.
We would have voted on the appeal, but when we got this notice of the forfeiture, there had been no requested appeal
Yes, I did.
Yes, there was.
back in the
Twice.
spring.
That's what we're talking about.
Well, I think
She
we're
called the
talking
selectman
about more
personally and asked for
recently.
one.
No, she was one of the first ones to request an appeal.
But it did not come in with within the 14 days. And moreover, there had been lack of use of that grant for many years prior to
That's not what we're talking about, though.
that's what we were talking about back then. Okay,
She was trying. My point is she was trying to
Can
get
you
the
just
appeal.
speak into the mic?
She was trying to get the appeal, whether she was late on the 14 days or not. She was trying. She made endless amounts of calls to the town hall. She went to the town hall. She's contacted the state numerous times. She's called the select board numerous times. She's not been negligent on that part. Yes, she might have been late on dates. Yes, she hasn't ever done nothing on the grant for a long time. Her late husband planted clams out there. Michael, her son, had done some stuff out there. Schooner had done very little out there. But the point is, she has been trying diligently to her best ability to do the right thing and present to you guys. It wasn't easy when you couldn't come here. You could only go on that thing. And I'm not good at that either, but I sat there at the meeting with her. We thought we was going to be called on that meeting. She was told that was the date. It wasn't, it was just the date for the selectmen's meeting, I guess. We waited and waited, and then I text Nancy and she said, you're not even on the minutes for it or whatever. But she has been trying diligently to do this.
Mr. Wolf?
Who told her that she had a date for a hearing?
I believe Rebecca.
Nope, it was Jean.
Jeannie told me
Jeannie?
first, and then Rebecca told me.
Jeannie first, and then she talked to Rebecca after. There was a change of hands there, and I think things got deboggled a little bit somehow, but I'm not laying blame, but the point is she did try, whether it was past the 14 days or before the 30, that's an issue for you guys to ponder about, but she did try, and she has tried, and she's tried getting me involved with this grant. I was with her son 5 years ago. We had everything all set. He bought the racks. I had the seed. He got the bags. He had everything. And then he dropped dead a week later. That sucked. That put a big wrench in the gear. Schooner was going to take over. He's gone through an ugly divorce. He's going through now. And COVID happened. He's been doing the best he can do with his two kids. He hasn't been applying himself to the grant. I guess he went out there a couple of times. Nancy did see him out there one time and reprimanded him about a buoy being in the wrong place or whatever, but that's neither here nor there. He was trying some, but with COVID, he had no extra money to put into the grant. And it just never materialized yet. I would personally see that it would meet productivity by the end of this year. At least by the end of this year, it would be tenfold of what productivity is for the year. I have the seed already. We got the gear already. We've talked endlessly about it. There's 50,000 oysters ready to go on there right now.
Okay, so Miss Wilson, please. So to the other members of the board, would the other members of the board consider we either grant the appeal, we issue basically the same order of conditions that we have issued on other ones. If they are not met, then the license is revoked at that time, or the license could be forfeited now if we take no action. So I want to know what the other members of the board would prefer to do at this point. Mr. Wolf?
Yeah. On the one hand, I have no desire to pull the rug out from under the shellfish warden in her efforts to establish some consistency as far as enforcing the regulations. On the other hand, we've had several previous situations like this in here, 2 weeks ago.
Yes, this one occurred before them.
I understand that. We gave them conditional extensions is my recollection.
Yes.
How would what we did there be consistent with allowing the forfeiture to go through on this one? That's the question I have.
Ms. Bacon? Yes, please.
Before you make your deliberations, when I was a select board member in 2017, this individual presented to us late in January of having not renewed her shellfish license. I've seen personally, when I was on the board, a pattern of neglect. And we were compassionate. We overlooked the failure to come in and get your license renewed. And we were hopeful that the grant was going to be working then. So, I mean, Nancy's documented all of this to you, but we're talking really about a 10-year period here. And at some point in time, you just have to let it go. But I want you to know that we've all been compassionate and kind with this particular grant holder. Thank you.
Okay, Ms. Savetta?
Just to answer John, even though I don't think it was directed at me, but there really is a difference between, and I feel horrible saying this, but there's a real difference between how this grant has been neglected in comparison to those other people who came in front of you. There's a really big difference. I met Schooner out there, you're right, and I helped him put the buoys out. I didn't reprimand him by any stretch of the imagination.
Yeah, if you can please.
So I'm just saying it's really very, very different. And it's been a long time we've tried.
Okay, Ms. Wilson?
Yes, the heavy lifting of doing this. And once again, nobody's happy about this. But I was there on the board with Kathleen at the time, and I can attest to that. And the mere fact that you don't have a propagation permit at this time, and also, excuse me, I'm still speaking. I want to hear what you have to say, but let me finish, please. Thank you. And the careful documentation of the grant not being worked by the two licensees, Schooner and yourself, Louine Grady, Ms. Grady. I agree with Kathleen that there's a time to let things go and let other people use it. Of course, you could have somebody transfer onto the grant, right? And they could work it and make it productive, but that hasn't happened. And although Chopper is offering to do the work that you and Schooner are not able to do, what we're hearing is the two licensees are not working the grant, have not worked the grant consistently up to production. And by the way, $1,000 a year is very, very low. And it's a really good low bar, so that people, if they have a hard year, and they can make that much, it isn't like way more than that, because you can make way more than that on a grant, like an acre. So those regulations are very, very supportive of people who don't do too well in a year. And it's over 3 years. You know, if you have to be productive for 3 years in a row before you forfeit, and it has to be really beautifully documented. But I really feel that with a heavy heart, I'm going to take no action because I feel that this was decided earlier and that appealing to have somebody else work on the grant, I don't know, that doesn't make sense to me. Why not just give it over to somebody else to have it in a lottery, free it up and let it become a resource opportunity for other people. Thank you.
Mr. Young?
We tried putting my name on it 3 years ago. And we said, the department said that that wasn't going to happen. I could only be on there as a worker. We did try doing that. As far as the propagation permit goes, she applied for that months ago to the state. They had it on their desk ready to issue. Then they received the letter from the department saying that don't give her the thing because she doesn't meet the criteria. It's still sitting at the desk. It's paid for. It's just awaiting permission to be granted. She does have it. She just doesn't have it in her hand yet.
Ms. Savetta, so there are some other licenses that have been forfeited. Is that correct? By the license holders?
The current grants that would be available for a lottery are either extremely deep water or extremely high up. And I think they will all be very difficult grants to work, but we will put them into a lottery eventually.
Yeah, but the ones that were forfeited as part of the minimum productivity enforcement actions, there were a few of them. Is that
There's
correct?
two, if I recall. One was David Payne's and Christy John's. Their Upland one, which is, I'm not sure if that's, we'll put it up for a lottery, but people will need to have their eyes open on that one. And then the ARC grant, and the Payne grant. Those two are very deep water ones, which are in the process of hopefully being able to get moved in. But again, that's going to be something that people are going to have to, we're going to have to lottery it off. They're going to have to understand that even if we move them in, they'll still be deep. The access might be better. And they'll have to go through the whole procedure of the MIPA. I'm sorry, of the Conservation Commission and the MIPA. Yes, MIPA, because it's going to be more than 3
Yeah, and there was
acres.
another one as well that
There's-
we're not going to reissue, correct?
There's the one next door to this one, which was never given out.
Okay, so that there was also the one held by Toby Sawyer.
Oh, no, that one's in Cape Cod Bay.
Yep. So in all of those instances, you had communication with those license holders that they did not wish to continue those licenses. Is that correct?
Let's see, with Toby, yes, because he didn't pay his grant fees, or he decided that's how he was going to forfeit it by not paying his grant fees. Allison and Buddy Payne, it was part of the same process that we didn't end up bringing them here because they decided to forfeit before we got here. So that was their decision as part of the minimum productivity enforcement that we did. ARC was revoked by the select board. The David Payne here speaking with you guys. So that was your negotiating, I guess.
So all the other licenses that have been, forfeited have had affirmed or basically communications with the license holders that is what they wished to do with those licenses.
It was very different circumstances, and this grant would be more, it was very different in the sense of how long the communications had been going on with these particular grant holders. We have not worked with those other people, but for, the last year or so.
So for the other licenses that we issued our order of conditions on that haven't had propagation occurring on them, they have to propagate those licenses by October 21st of this year.
Yeah, I have to see those. I don't have any copy of that yet, so
Okay.
that will be helpful for us to do our jobs.
So, I don't know, again, I just need to know from the board what they wish to do so that we can, just make a decision, determination tonight.
At this point, reluctantly, I would advocate taking no action.
Mr. Chairman, I guess I'd like to focus on procedure for a moment, and it's partly because I think I'm the newest one here. So through you, this question is for everyone who's been here longer than I have. So have there been occasions before where there was a situation like this, where there was no appeal taken within the time, and then after that time, there was basically a hearing on what would have basically an appeal hearing, even though there was no appeal taken?
So I don't think there's been a minimum productivity enforcement done by the department for, do you know when the last time was, Nancy?
What I know is that what Barbara's describing has not happened. So nobody's been given a public hearing outside of what the regulations specify. So,
So
and the
so
minimum
that-
productivity hearings, yes, happened under my predecessors. Yes, they
and when
did.
was the last one?
I don't know, it was before me.
So.
So I didn't go back and look.
And were any other ones to Ms. Carboni's question, or any of the other ones, were there any licenses that were forfeited?
I do not know because it was before my time, but
Well-
Johnny and Chris have both worked on forfeitures before and on minimum productivity.
Ms. Wilson?
Mr. Chair, it was not before my time. I can't give you the exact dates, but I can remember two. And they could be looked up. I could ask Andy Koch, our former shellfish constable, where people noticed that or felt when they were on a grant. In one case, it was hard to farm. I think it was deep water. And I'm not going to name names because I don't want to get it wrong. I'm bad on names. But in two cases, people surrendered their grants after some exchange with the shellfish department, which is a version of what happened with a few people here. And it's kind of a dignified way of admitting that for whatever reason, you can't farm that piece of the bottom and you're going to let it go so other people can have it. I can remember two situations like that. And in one case, in my first year on this board in 2003 into 2004, I think, there was someone who had not been working their grant. And it's one of the 5 bad votes I've made in 23 years. And I'd read the regs, but I didn't really get them. And she had absolutely not used it. Shellfish Constable came in with it. And the rest of the select board decided to cut her some slack. And I later realized that there was no hardship involved. She just hadn't been using it and she didn't want to admit it. And, eventually within the year, we took it away from her, naming no names, because she just didn't work it. No shame in that, but it's more dignified when the person realizes they can't do that gardening there and they surrender it. Thank you. I wish to take no action on this. I don't feel hearing other people on a subject as important as somebody's ability to farm or not farm. I don't feel it's a wasted effort, but I feel that this has already been looked at carefully and decided, and I want to stick with what we did before with this and take no action tonight. Thank you.
Ms. Carboni, did you have?
Yeah, I guess because, under the regulations that we have currently, a forfeiture has taken place just under the regulations that we have. And if we were to do anything else, I think we would need to make, I would want us to make some sort of finding. I'm not sure what that would be, but we have to sort of provide some sort of basis for basically going outside what the regulations currently provide. And, you know, I voted a couple weeks ago to revoke ARC's grant because they didn't, you know, conform. They weren't an eligible entity. They didn't conform to the regulations. So I just think to be consistent with that, I just think if we're going to do something that isn't provided by the regulations, we need to have some basis for doing it and just make some kind of finding.
Sure.
So I'm not averse to that, but that's what I think we would need.
So the finding would be that we don't have documentation as to when the request to have an appeal was first held or first placed. But, you know, more likely than not, it did not occur within the 14-day period. But it did occur at least shortly thereafter. That would be you know, so, but I'll defer to the board. Yep. So if somebody wants to make a motion. So, so there needs to be,
Can I say one
Yep.
more thing, please?
but,
With-
but if you can keep it brief.
Yeah, well, tell it to the others too. Thank you.
Right.
I'm interested in Barbara Carboni's consideration of a finding that we should make an exception. And one of the things that's surprising to me and was surprising to me after being on CBA, Planning Board, Housing Authority, and so forth, is the shellfish regulations are way more clear and way more strict. There's only one section in our regulations that allows this board to make an exception. It's a hardship exemption for people who don't apply for their commercial permit in time. And it's very strict. Otherwise, the shellfish constable has a few things that she can, there's a little wiggle room there, and it's always compassionate. But basically, it's the strictest set of regulations or laws I've ever worked under for land use. And there is no way to make a finding to accept from a regulation. That said, our regulations are pretty compassionate because we've had to develop regulations for shellfishing because there's so many of us and it's so important. And so I don't ever want to go outside of them because you can't because of the language. And in this case, I'm afraid that I would take no action.
So, Ms. Wilson,
Done.
basically, because of this license and the process that happened with how it was handled, was where we realized that we needed to do a better job at recording when appeals were requested. Before the issues around this license happened, there was no record keeping.
There was some.
No, there was no record keeping of when an appeal was filed.
There was a great deal of documentation, if I may, about contact to the licensee about the condition that the shellfish department
So,
saw. Please don't
yeah,
interrupt.
so,
There
but
was a
this
lot
is,
of documentation of that.
And Jeannie Mac would have documented it. Jeannie Mac was fine at documentation. She documents all of the payments that come in for grant fees. She documents all of the monthly reports. As you said, she's the person who does that. And she's done it for 20 years. So she would have documented it. It did not come in. I went and met with her to make sure that it didn't come in. And then a week later is when I walked in when Louis was trying to pay her fees.
Mr. Young, and then we really do need to.
When Jeannie was there, maybe we could call her for some kind of a meeting to ask her, because she's the ultimate decider here, whether there was or wasn't documentation or what day it was, or if it was information, she should have something written down somewhere other than when she took over, maybe.
Would there be any point to continuing it until we were able to get Jeannie Mac in here?
Jeannie Mac and I spoke. Jeannie Mac and I spoke. So I know that there was no public hearing request made. I went in on purpose daily. I move that we take no action on this matter. I trust the Shellfish Constable's report, and there would be no reason for her to say that. And everything we've gotten from the Shellfish Constable confirms that she would have really tried to verify whether or not this had happened in every possible way. And I have to tell you that my experience of Jean McLaughlin over 23 years is a very good one in terms of her documentation and her looking things up. So, you know, I know that much. She was the one that first alerted me that people weren't turning in their annual reports, and that got actually way improved because she did that.
Mr. Young, can you again say what the principal clerk had communicated to you earlier?
The principal clerk, Rebecca?
No, Rebecca is the executive assistant, so the principal clerk is Jeannie.
Jeannie Mac.
Yep.
All of my communication with her is through Louine. She told me she spoke to her, and it's all more or less hearsay between me and her. But I know for a fact that she did talk to her, and she has no reason to lie to me. I've been in this together with her the whole time. There was language between her and Jeannie Mac. Well, Nancy says that didn't happen. That's basically not true.
No,
We'll
I
get
just
Jeannie
said-
Mac on the stand if we have to. That's not true.
It was
There
after
was.
the time. It
I'm
was
not
after
saying-
the
I'm
deadline.
not saying the date. I'm saying the
Okay.
conversation. right
I
now,
was
and
talking
that's what
about
I'm
before the
answering.
date,
I'm
just
not
so that we're
If you
clear.
two,
Before and after.
can you? Okay.
I don't think it's fair to not have a date on a piece of paper by a secretary that's supposed to keep these notes. I don't care if it was the day before, the day after, a week before, a week after. That's not really fair to have a constable here in hearsay saying I talked to her and it didn't happen. I don't really think that's fair. I think this
That's not what
town
I said.
stands for something better than that. I know she's worked hard and she's gone through all these lengths to take this grant. It's abundantly clear that was the agenda. That's why there was no phone calls made. One certified mail ends somebody's whole grant. That's what it was. One registered letter. That was the big communication, and I don't think that's fair either.
Ms. Eldridge, can you speak to your ability to readily access every part of the work that was done by the principal clerk?
I can do it now. I couldn't do it when I first started over because I didn't have any access to anything.
Okay, and
I'm able to look up shellfish records that are all in the administration office.
yeah,
They're all in filing cabinets.
what about any records that she may have kept of when people made certain filings?
I can look on her. I have not been able to look into her computer accessing those, but she did tell me that she said that Chopper may have, she might have done all that Chopper is saying, but she never once submitted a letter requesting an appeal.
So
That's what Jean just said.
Never, ever.
And
let
she's
her know.
more than, I think
Right,
she's on the
absolutely.
meeting if you want to talk
Yep.
to her.
so
Over the phone.
so the letters that went out, they said to request an appeal, all you had to do was basically place a call.
Mhm.
Yes, so
Mhm.
there wasn't a form for them to submit.
Mm-mm. And when I first, the first time I took over when Jean left on medical leave was when Chopper's grants and those forfeitures came out. So I made sure to keep
on
a
this.
file of every single document that came in and every single phone call that came in stating that they wanted their hearing to be done on the 24th. And everyone called, even the Paynes called at first, and then they called and said they didn't want a hearing anymore. And that was highlighted as well, just so that everybody knew exactly when they called to request their date, so that we knew that it was in the 2-week period, and Nancy understood that.
And we worked together to do that because there was no Jeannie Mac, right? Because Jeannie would do this all the time. And Jeannie did not get a call from Louine within the time period. And perhaps they spoke afterwards, but Jeannie Mack would not have offered to give her a public hearing because she knew fully well. She knows the regulations better than me, you know, she's been here for 20 years. So there was no breakdown of communication. And Jeannie Mack documents everything. So if there had been something, it would have been documented. So there were conversations, but not about requesting an appeal within the time period.
Mr. Young, and we really do need to.
Yes, I understand that. I'm sorry. She keeps impeccable notes. Fortunately, there's some information you might want to see who she talked to and when she did it. If you want to see it.
If you can
No.
just read it.
Yeah, if you could just, I'll read it because I'm neutral. I can read your handwriting. Thank you. That's good. So these are, wait, these are notes written by Louine Brady?
Notes.
Louine, are these yours? Yes. Okay, so here we go. So on March 29th, that grant was legally already forfeited. And the first call that's dated here is March 29th. It had already been forfeited. In other words, the horse had left the barn, unfortunately. And if this was a different shellfish constable who didn't do the kind of outreach that Nancy Chavetta does.
Okay, can you just speak to the
notes.
actual notes
Okay,
and not?
so in office at 11:50 a.m., March 29th, 2022, Nancy said, and this is circled, cannot request a hearing, cannot request an appeal, need lawyer to continue the process, didn't meet the timeline of 2 weeks. And then, yes, and I'll read that too. Then there's something which we've already heard described by the shellfish constable, and it confirms it. In other words, Nancy Chavetta was on the phone and explained the grant was forfeited. And then it says at the top of this one, Rebecca, that is to say, Rebecca Eldridge wrote this stuff down for me. So this is, Rebecca Eldridge, is this your, are these your, is this your handwriting?
Mhm.
Oh, okay. So, but it's from Louine, okay? Shellfish hearing for grants, May 24th, but nothing specified. In other words, we were going to have a shellfish hearing for grants.
But they weren't on the agenda.
What?
What else does it say?
No, they weren't, but in other words, one was going to take place. And as we know, they don't happen every meeting. Then it was going to be Zoom or in-person COA, and call me the week before the meeting. That's a note from Rebecca. And then Ms. Grady went in on March 7th. And all this says is letter, March 22nd, first hearing in front of selectmen. Jean, that's Jean McLaughlin, said wasn't until March 22nd. And was in front waiting for our name to be called, and it wasn't called. This was all after the grant had been forfeited. Okay. So I don't know whose handwriting this is. Perhaps it's Ms. Grady's, it's not Rebecca's. This was asked on the March 7th for a meeting. It says asked on March 7th for a meeting. I'm requesting another hearing because the last day to go before the selectmen, I was given to go on Zoom at 6 p.m. on March 22nd, and I would be called on by the selectmen to hear me about my grant. It was on Zoom at 6 p.m. I was on Zoom at 6 p.m. waiting to be called and wasn't called. I did what I was told to do, and I would be called. I did what I was called to do, and I was told, sick, I would be called. It didn't happen. I sat for over 2 hours waiting to hear my name called, like Jean told me would happen. Oh, dear. Well, it didn't.
There's two more of it. So she had a very long conversation. She so-called never even talked to those ones.
Okay, this is all happening after, hold
The
on.
grant was forfeited March 29th.
The 7th. That was on the 7th.
I'm-
For the 7th.
Okay.
I issued the
Talked to
letter.
Jeannie Mac. She said she didn't.
Motion was made 5 or 6
Yep,
minutes
there was
ago.
no second.
There was no
There
second
was no
yet.
second.
Thank you, Kathleen, but there was no second. I was simply,
We waited until after your March 22nd public hearing where you decided that the forfeiture was automatic. And then I wrote the letter. I had informed you of that before that.
So
however.
right
Got
now,
lied to.
we're just, I mean, if we can, Miss Wilson.
I've got a question. Are we, is this indicating that Jeannie Mac told her that she would
Yes.
be on a hearing
Yes.
on
Nancy said
March
she didn't,
22nd?
but there's.
Why didn't
multiple
it
notes.
happen?
I was unaware that there was a public hearing.
All right, so
And
so
she was
Jeannie Mac
outside
apparently
of the
didn't communicate this.
It was outside of the time period, however. It was outside of the appeal time period.
Well, when she asked Jeannie Mac to issue the letter or set up the appeal, was that within the time frame when she asked her?
7th.
Her time period expired like in the 20s, like February 20 something was when she signed for it on February 9th, if I'm not mistaken.
Yep.
So 9 plus 14,
So
February
you're-
23rd.
The memo, it says February 28th, 26, or February 24th. Would have been 14 days after they signed for it.
Okay, so even asking Jeannie Mac to put it on the agenda was after the time period. All right,
So
in that case, I'm going to second the motion.
can we not discuss the motion further? Mr. Young, one last time, and then I have to.
Yeah. Earlier, we heard that there was no request at all from Jeannie Mac because Nancy talked to her and she said there was none. Like I said, there was a lot of talk and she started keeping notes after a while, and there's just proof that there was plenty of talk in trying to do this. She had 3 operations prior to those dates. And she was kind of out of it, but
Well, within the 14 days, that's what
Yeah,
I was
well-
referring to, Chopper. I just want to be clear. It was within the time
okay,
period that's
but
allowed.
it's
That's what I
abundantly
was.
clear that she
taking-
missed the 14 days, but shortly thereafter, when she came out of her stupor from the medications of having her shoulders ripped out and everything else, when it came to light is when I got involved and told her she needed to do this stuff. We started doing it and she kept pretty good notes. There they all are in front of you, if that's.
And Schooner didn't
Okay.
either, and
I-
it's
I'm
his
not
own,
talking
his
about
mom.
Schooner.
So
Talking
at this
about the
point,
Jeannie Mac is on if you want to talk to her.
well, the motion's been made and
oh,
seconded.
so wait, Jean McLaughlin's on and we can talk with her?
Okay. Where is
Um,
she?
Excellent.
Uh,
I don't see her.
uh,
I didn't see her when you said that the first
She
time.
said she-
Sorry. Okay, well, okay,
Is she or isn't she?
I'm not seeing her.
Checking. I don't see her, but
Okay,
Oh, hang on.
Change it.
no,
It's all about the dates.
yeah, I don't see her.
She's on. I just unmuted her. Go ahead, Jean, you're unmuted.
Jean, can you speak to when an appeal might have been requested? Okay.
Is on there.
Okay. So the motion's been made and seconded. So I'm going to ask for a roll call vote at this point. So
John, I.
Barbara, nay.
Brian, nay.
Helen, I.
Okay, motion carries motion fails 2-2.
So do we have another motion?
If it's going to be to issue order of conditions, unless another board member agrees to it, that motion will also fail.
What happens then?
Well, then it remains forfeited.
No, it wouldn't, because
It's already forfeited.
It's already forfeited. Nobody is happy about this.
okay. So I can read out the order of conditions.
Unless you make a motion that
Yeah,
says
I'm
that.
gonna do that, Nancy. I don't think it's gonna go anywhere, so, but just pro forma. By October, so I move that by October 21st, 2022, the Grady's must provide proof of 40,000 seed being planted to the satisfaction of Shellfish Constable on the license. If the license holder disagrees with the constable's determination of the fact, the license holder may appeal with the select board. Said appeal must be filed within 21 days of the Shellfish Constable's determination. The board shall hear the appeal within 21 days of the filing. These minimum levels of propagation must be adhered to each of the adhered to in each of the following years thereafter. Said seed may be oyster or quahog or a combination of both, and may be wild, may be caught seed or purchased. And to issue a license for the license site for a 1-year term.
Second.
So roll call vote.
John, nay.
Barbara, I.
Brian, I.
Helen, nay.
Okay, so motion fails 2-2.
Ryan, may I say one brief thing, please?
If you can be very brief, Helen.
Yes, I can try. And we waste time saying that every time, but I so respect the people of this harbor who work harvesting in the wild with a commercial permit, working their licenses, their licensed areas, and who comply with the regulations. I so respect that and I so support it. And it breaks my heart when people don't understand
Okay,
the
so,
privilege
Ms.
of doing
Wilson-
that. Oh, stop it,
No,
Brian.
no,
No, we need to move
we
on.
really do.
That's
yeah.
fine.
So, Ms. Wilson, the motion's been made. It's,
Moving
so
on.
there's no action, so the license has been forfeited. So onto the Grays. So thank you for coming tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, so I close the public hearing on license number 95. What was the number? 9515. And I hereby open the license or the public hearing on grant license number 7312 held by James and Allison Gray. All right. Yep. So if you can give them just a minute. So the previous select board meeting, we issued orders of conditions for various licenses, either to show minimum productivity or propagate in order to meet minimum productivity. So basically what those were was what I just made for, or similar to the one that I just made, but basically 40,000 seed per acre. There, for this license, there was we couldn't issue order of conditions because because the license renewal was up for renewal and that wasn't on our agenda, so we couldn't, issue order of conditions on a license that we hadn't renewed yet. So this is to renew the license, and at the same time will be to issue order of conditions for the minimum productivity. So I just want that to be clear to everybody. And previously you said that you're amenable to our order of conditions. Would you still be so?
Yes.
Okay. Helen,
Yeah, conditional also on first receiving your propagation permit for 2022. And that should have been gotten a while ago, but you didn't know, yes, but you didn't know about this, so. And have you paid your 2021 grant fee? Do you have a canceled check, a receipt, a credit card
Paid with
bill?
cash.
You paid with cash.
It wasn't her, because she says that it wasn't me that she saw, that she remembers there. I don't know if you remember the last meeting.
Okay,
So
so conditional upon that being certified that it somehow happened. In other words, if Jean McLaughlin was there and she
So-
did it, she would have recorded it.
one minute. So,
Not done.
no.
I'm sorry, I'm still talking about conditions. Please
So-
let me finish.
so-
I have one
But
more.
proof that,
Brian, please. This is a probationary situation. There were things that you didn't do for whatever reason, and in some cases it was a hardship, and then there was a pandemic. But we should not, in this case, I think, renew for 10 years. We should renew for 3 years, probationary, 3 years, classes of shellfish can grow out.
take it for 6 months.
What?
I'm not arguing that.
Okay, but not to, and then after that, you would go to the 10-year renewal
Yes,
thing.
we understand how the renewal process works, Ms.
Yes, but
Wilson.
in this case,
Please,
it's for 3 years,
yes.
which is probationary.
that's
That is
clear,
not how it
please.
usually
So-
works.
So for one of the issues is to establish, clear consistency with the other orders, the conditions that have been issued. The other ones, their licenses had various expiration terms. The other one that was not being propagated had a license expiration term of 2026. So the annual reports are due on February 28th of each year. So I would, and the orders and conditions require a certain level of seed being planted each year. So we can issue a license for the license site in order to be consistent. I would also want it to expire on February 28th, 2026. And so, because that's when the annual reports are due for the licenses, if that makes sense. That's
Hold on, I need to do, what is the math there? So it's 22, so
Yep.
2026 is in 4 years.
not quite, because it's June now.
Ah, thank you.
Yes, so I move to issue a license or to renew a license to James and Allison Gray for grant license numbers 7312 with the following order of conditions: that by October 21st, 2022, the license holders must provide proof of 20,000 seed being planted to the satisfaction of the Shellfish Constable. If the license holder disagrees with the constable's determination of the fact, the license holder may appeal to the select board. Said appeal must be filed within 21 days of the Shellfish Constable's determination, and the board shall hear the appeal within 21 days of that filing. These minimum levels of propagation must be adhered to in each of the following years thereafter. Said seed may be oyster or quahog or a combination of both. both and may be caught, seed, or purchased. And the license holder must pay their license fee with a check within the next 30 days.
John, second.
Can I have a roll call vote, please?
John, I.
Barbara, I.
Brian, I.
Ellen, I, and Ryan, that was carefully worded, and may that entire state, conditioning go verbatim into the record, please.
Okay.
Excellent.
Miss, where's Mike?
Right behind you.
So
Mike,
thank you.
come back.
Thank you for your time tonight.
Thank you.
And
Thank you
I
for
hereby
waiting.
close the public hearing on license number 7312. And I hereby open a public hearing to set a limitation on the number of medical or limitation on recreational marijuana dispensaries within Wellfleet.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
so I requested a piece of information that was not included in the packet, and it's a very important one. We can do this. We approved this ability to do it at town meeting a while back. But what we need to know tonight is how many, what I call package stores when I was growing up, how many package stores do we have in town right now? Because we can only limit, we have to know what the 20% of the number of package stores, that is to say, not pouring, not serving, selling liquor, alcohol.
Yes, we understand what a package store is, Ms. Wilson. Mr. DeVasto, can you shed some light to that maybe?
We were told by town council that the limit, we had to have a minimum of 3 dispensaries to meet the threshold, minimum number of 3. And we have not added any package stores. Actually, we have not added any package stores, but that limit actually, because of the rounding that the state requires, even if we added package stores, it would still be 3.
Yes, but how
and
many do we have? I was there for all of
I
this.
don't remember, but I know that our number is 3 as far as our limitation.
Yeah, so why don't you present, because you're the
Sure.
requester
So
of this.
originally, this came before us with host agreements. We received, well, actually, it starts before that when we were determining to set limits on the number of dispensaries. We created a general bylaw at town meeting to allow the select board to set the number of dispensaries in the town. Rather than set one at town meeting, we wanted to sort of see what happened. And a lot of what was going on is there were a lot of host agreements going around, and we were under the impression that most host agreements didn't actually materialize into dispensaries because people were applying for host agreements here and there. And there wasn't actually that much space in the town of Wellfleet to have a dispensary. So we issued 4 host agreements to dispensaries. There's still 4 host agreements and 3 operating dispensaries right now. I'm proposing that we allow those 4 valid host agreements and 4 dispensaries to continue, but that should one fail or go under or not cease to operate, that the limit be set to 3 after that. Because basically, I think, and I'm somebody who originally sort of said, why are we distinguishing between alcohol and marijuana? I mean, we allow this many licenses, let's not put a limit on it. But now I see there's a lot more investment that goes into creating these dispensaries. I know that the margins are low and the competition on the Outer Cape is really high. And I don't think it's very good to set up businesses to fail, particularly small local businesses that may have competition with larger corporations that are moving in. Like A lot of companies that open dispensaries have multiple dispensaries. Some of them are, based out of Colorado, and they've bought host agreements and things like of that nature. So basically what I'm proposing is that we, and I have the motion somewhere. Is there a proposed motion? Can I see that,
I
Helen, for a
can't
second?
find it.
Yes.
No.
Okay, sorry,
Yeah.
let me just bring my thing up because I was recused, oh, thank you. So I'll just read the motion and then we can discuss after that, if that's okay. So I move to set the limit of marijuana dispensaries to 3. Any existing dispensaries or valid host agreements as of June 7th, 2022 shall be considered pre-existing and allowed to continue to operate so long as they remain in compliance and in good standing with the state and local regulations, agreements, and licenses. And one thing to note is that the select board also has the ability to raise that number at any point in the future if they deem that it's suitable for the town. So that's the motion that I proposed, and
So I'll second for the
Discussion.
sake of discussion. So I would actually want to set the limit at 4 because that's how many licenses have been issued. In 2 of the instances with community host agreements, the community host agreement expired before they were able to resume or initiate operations. So with the motion that was made, if that was to occur with the 4th one that currently has a community host agreement before they enter into full operations, that would not be allowable to be relight, or that community host agreement would not be allowed under the motion.
they wouldn't be able to renew their host agreement.
Because the host agreement would have expired.
Yeah, they have
So,
to reapply.
Yeah, because they have to, as terms and conditions of the host agreements, they have to initiate operations within a certain time frame. And if they don't, the host agreement expires. So we've renegotiated 2 community host agreements in the last year.
That were allowed to expire.
Yes.
But if you don't allow them to expire, you can renew that host agreement in
So
the language.
they expired due to a delay in the
Licensing.
Cannabis Control Commission actually licensing the operations. It wasn't they chose not to. It was that they have to initiate operations within a certain time period. And if they don't, then the community host agreement expires and is subject to renegotiation or re-agreement on the part of the town.
No, I agree. But there's a provision in that host agreement that allows them to renew prior to the expiration.
No,
Let's look it up.
no,
All right. Well, I'm pretty
because
sure.
that's
that
why
there's-
both of them were renegotiated.
Well, they just missed their deadline. So they had to renegotiate a new host agreement, but in the language, they can come before the board and renew the host agreement prior to the expiration.
So I would actually move to amend the motion to set the limit at 4.
Can I say something before we do
Um,
that?
Ms. Carboni?
I don't know when's the right time to ask this. It's a procedural question as usual, so.
Okay.
So do we need to vote on the merits of it? That is, this board voting to limit the number of dispensaries or facilities to 3? Or are we just voting to put it on the ballot?
No, we are voting to actually set the limit. The ballot question, that comes into play if you're trying to go below the thresholds or if it's a medical dispensary. So if you're trying to go below the threshold that the state sets, then you need to have a ballot question.
Okay, so what is the process for that, for
So
for
this
what
was
we're
done
doing?
through a general bylaw, through a town meeting vote. So in
Okay.
our general bylaws, it just basically, and we can bring this up.
Yeah, could I,
Um,
yeah, I'm sorry. Again,
No,
I'm new
that's
here.
fine. I should have included the general bylaw into the packet.
Yeah, so it says something like by vote of the select board, the
Yeah,
number of,
No, the general bylaws in the packet.
oh, it
Oh, it
is.
is in the
I
packet.
included it.
Okay,
It says
thank you, Ryan.
Section 47. limitation on number of marijuana dispensaries in town. Number of licenses for registered retail marijuana establishments as defined by general law, chapter 94G, section 1,
Okay.
may be limited or granted at the discretion of the select board serving as the licensing board, provided that minimum, not, I don't need to
Okay.
repeat the rest.
Yeah,
of it.
sorry, it was in the packet. I'm
So.
sorry. Okay.
Ms. Wilson?
Yeah, so packets are hard to put together. I would have liked also a copy of our annual town meeting vote that allowed us to do that.
Why? It's in the
No,
bylaw.
it's a state thing. In other words, there's a statute, a state statute that allows us to have this be a general bylaw, number one. Number two, through you, Ryan, to Mike, and I bet you did, but did you run this by town council? Because
Helen, we did that when we established the bylaw.
No,
and
no.
It went to town council and to town meeting and then became voted on. So
no, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about your motion.
why would I
Okay,
run the motion by town council?
because I'm not quite sure we can do that. And I was there for all of that too, in great detail. So I suggest that we get an opinion from town council. It's probably good, Mike. But the point is, I don't want to back us into a lawsuit when we don't need to. And I suggest that this gets bumped to, a meeting sometime soon.
What in here is unclear about
I'm not sure that we can, given what Ryan said, limit it to 3 or 4 under the circumstances that one of them might be not licensed yet. Do you see what I mean? By
That's
the
why it
state,
says
by the
valid host agreement.
So
But
I made a motion to amend it to read 4.
Okay, I second it.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I think we did post this as a public hearing, so. if
So any public comment must be heard. But I don't see any. Nobody has their hands up on Zoom either.
Okay.
Are there any other questions about just what to the scope of the motion, which right now is to amend the previous motion to read 4? The previous motion has not been carried or moved on.
So do we need to vote on the amended motion?
I seconded it.
So just for the amendment,
Okay, and then we'll discuss the merits.
Yep.
Okay,
John, I.
Barbara, I.
Brian, I.
Michael, I, for the sake of discussion.
Helen, I, for the
Okay.
sake of discussion.
Okay, and then so for the main motion now reads to limit to limit it to 4 essentially. So is there Ms. Carboni?
Yeah, so I think that the argument in favor of limiting the number of facilities is because I think what Mr. DeVasta, what you were saying is because we might be setting up businesses to fail because there's a lot of competition in the market. And so that's the reason to limit it. Is that correct?
The rationale, I think, is that there's much more investment involved in getting these dispensaries starting than in a typical business. And that there's been a huge growth in the number of these businesses on the outer Cape. So the competition is already stiff. So the reason behind it is that, if we have 4 dispensaries and one of them, can't make it, ought we to continue allowing 4 dispensaries, particularly when there's a lot of corporate interest in this field that can afford to reduce prices and squeeze competition. And that's the thing that, concerns me about, about it continuing to remain open to maybe a larger number than the town can actually support. So, we could, I'd prefer to do this where we allow these to be pre-existing. I understand Ryan's concern though, and if that's the case, that they can't come and renew their host agreement prior to expiration, but I'm almost 100% sure that there's a provision in there that they can renew their host agreement, but I'm just looking for a copy of the host agreements.
Yeah.
Rebecca, do you have one?
If one ceases to operate, we could always, address that then. And
At
reduce
that
the number.
moment, we
Right.
could do that.
I guess, I mean, we don't do this with any other industry. And so my question is
Sure.
really, don't we let the market take care of that? Whether, which is not something that I say that often, but.
Well, it's actually what I said in the beginning.
Okay.
That was like very much my argument was let the market take care of this and
Right.
let's not limit any of them at all in the town of Wellfleet. And I pushed pretty hard for that in the beginning, but seeing the economic condition and the type of business that it is, it's very much different than most businesses.
Ryan, may I address what Ms. Carboni just said?
Let me call in order of raised hands. So Mr. Wolf first.
Yeah, well, Ms. Carboni sort of stole my thunder on that, but I mean, I have no objection to the motion particularly, but it had occurred to me that the market could probably pretty much, somebody could see what's going on here and think, well, do I really want to open a store, a marijuana store? Yeah, no, with there are already 4 of them. I had concerns about one of them that opened early on, which this is way before I was on the board, but that's water under the bridge. As far as sources of their funding and so forth. I share your concerns about corporate involvement in this sort of thing. That for seeing these as local businesses.
Ms. Wilson?
Yes, to address Barbara and John, guess what? We do that with liquor licenses. We can limit, and the state is, have fun reading that, but go ahead and read it. Every licensing set of laws is different. Laws, regulations. It's frightening. Every single thing we license, we are the licensing board. And liquor establishments, whether they're pouring or whether they're, package stores, all have limits. And they even have other restrictions, like you can't have 2 of them too close together. So my concerns are, I'm a supportive of the capitalist system with reservations. But my concerns are different from Mike's. It's more that we have a whole lot of liquor stores, and the state has decided, for whatever reason, which makes no sense to me, but never mind, the state has decided that we can't have less than 20% of however many liquor stores we have. So I guess what they're all thinking about is, how do you go out and get drunk or stoned? I don't know what they're thinking. I'm being humorous, but really, I don't know. And I felt always, hey, let's sell this, let's sell liquor. People can manage their own lives. But I now realize that there's a rationale for limiting how many liquor stores we have, how many, dispensaries of various sorts. And I think 4 would be almost too much, considering that it's the whole area that I'm really thinking about how many cannabis dispensaries of various sorts we already have. And I was in, the first time it became legal, I was on the board then, and boy, did we go over this carefully. So thank you.
I don't know if that anyone else, but I'm ready.
So can I call the motion?
I don't know if we can do this, but
Yeah. Definitely can at 4, Helen. So, which is what the current motion.
yes, no, I know.
So I call the motion. Can I have a roll call vote?
John, I.
Sorry,
Yep.
just, can you remind me what the motion is?
So the motion is, I move to set the limit of marijuana dispensaries to 4. Any pre-existing dispensaries or valid host agreements as of June 7th, 2022 shall be considered pre-existing and allowed to continue to operate so long as they remain in compliance and good standing with state and local regulations, agreements, and licenses.
Thank you. Barbara, no.
Ryan,
Sorry, what was your vote, Barbara?
Nay.
Nay, okay. Michael, aye. That's fine. It's at 4. The
Yeah.
current number. That's fine.
Brian, what's your
Yep.
vote?
I guess Ryan, I.
Helen and I want to remind everybody that every host agreement is
Yep.
slightly different.
Okay, so on to the town meeting. Town moderator Danny Silverman. A request to approve modifications of the town meeting forum from 182 residents to 100 residents for the annual town meeting to be held on June 11th, 2022. Let's see.
John second.
No, we have to, so you can only do this in consultation with the moderator, and I'd like to ask him to, he's the requester of this, and I'd like to ask him to address the question. Danny, you should be unmuted.
Yeah, excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yes, the statute, this is temporary legislation that was passed by the Great and General Court in response to COVID. The select board can vote this after having provided public notice of at least 7 days, which you have done, and it has to be done in consultation with the moderator. I'm consulting with you now. I think it's a good idea to make sure that we can get the business of town meeting done. So I'm recommending dropping to a quorum of 100. Of course, that doesn't limit, and as many people can come as want to. There's no limit on the number. It just sets the minimum that we need to open and continue town meeting.
Sure, and can you speak to what would happen if we were to lose quorum?
Meeting would have to adjourn to a time certain, and we would need to recall the meeting to order at another time and place. And we need to keep going until we've acted on all matters before the town. Our charter requires the town meeting act on all of the items within a warrant. We can't do half a town meeting and call it a day.
Okay, so John, you wanted to make a motion?
Oh, yeah, sure. I move to approve the modification of the Wellfleet Town Meeting quorum from 182 residents to 100 residents for the annual town meeting to be held on June 11th, 2022.
Helen, second.
Okay, can I have a roll call vote, please?
John, aye.
Barbara, I.
Michael, aye.
Brian, I.
Helen, I.
Thank you.
Town meeting. I don't think there's anything left to go over on the warrant. Okay. Mr. Silverman, do we need to approve the motions packet?
No, there's not an approval process for that. Just for the sake of informing the people who are attending the meeting tonight, the motions booklet has been prepared. It's available on the town website. It will be handed to every voter when they check in at town meeting. And what this will do is give each voter in attendance the actual wording of the motions, and it allows the select board, whoever else is making those main motions, just to make it by kind of a shortcut, if you will, of making reference to the wording of the motion that will be contained within the town motions booklet. Again, we've used this for a couple of years. It's passed muster with the town council. Town council for a couple of years has said that as long as each voter has the actual wording of the motion in front of them, that we don't need to read the actual motion. So it does streamline the process of making the motions, but it doesn't require any action by you tonight.
Okay, and all the other measures being taken at town meeting is going to run essentially how it did last year?
Yes, pretty much. We posted guidance on the town website. We're just briefly, it's for those who haven't attended, check-in will be at the ball field. when you were asking people, to mask wearing is optional. We're recommending it for anyone who's uncomfortable or anyone who hasn't been vaccinated, certainly, or anybody who has any kind of medical compromise, but we're not mandating mask wearing. We're going to set the field up with this chairs spaced, and people can bring their own chairs. Obviously, I just refer you to the guidance that's on the town website. I believe the Chamber of Commerce. I appreciate they sent it out as well, so it's available in a couple of different places, but very similar to the way that we did last year. I'm just hoping the weather right now looks, I don't want to say questionable. If we can get the meeting started promptly, I'm hoping that we can complete the business of town meeting by early afternoon. Maybe be whatever showers are coming along, but we're going to have to play that by ear. Just for the sake of information, I suggest that if we do need to postpone the meeting because of rain, that we use the Civic Plus system to let people know. I'll talk to Chief Hurley about that. I think he's probably most qualified to use that system. But the rain date is Sunday. And again, just for information, if both Saturday and Sunday are rained out, our next two rain dates are the following weekend. Unfortunately, we will not have a tent for those 2 dates. By the time we decided when we were doing the town meeting, all of the vendors who could supply us with a tent were already booked for weddings, graduations, various other things going on. So, if it's a bright sunny day, I think people are going to have to come with sunscreen and umbrellas and big hats and so forth, which is why I'd really like to get the meeting done this weekend, if at all possible. So if people can get there early and check in, and we can start the meeting right on time, and people can be judicious in their debate, and the amount of time they take for debate, I'm hoping we can conclude the meeting on Saturday.
Okay. I would just like to remind everybody to make sure that they bring enough water. Typically, the meeting last year took a little over 6 hours. So staying, properly hydrated is important. Mr. Waldo, is there anything that we should be going over for town meeting tonight before we move on?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I believe at this point we are all set. I think we have conducted all our businesses ahead of town meeting, and we're ready to go on Saturday morning.
Okay. So with that, thank you, Danny.
Thank you,
We'll
Mr.
see you
Chair.
on Saturday, hopefully.
See you on Saturday.
As well. Yes. Yep. Yeah, there wasn't, that was a placeholder, essentially, just in case. Okay, so Carol Ridley and the Herring River Restoration Project. Not at this point, we've moved on. If you had raised your hand, you would have been recognized. Oh, I didn't see you, I'm sorry.
Well, if she raised her hand, may we hear what she has to say, please? It's hard always to see in the audience.
I saw her raise her hand.
You did? Okay,
Yeah.
so Ms. Ern. Sorry. Yeah, you just.
I just want to say for the record, lowering quorum to 100 is really shocking to me, and I don't think it's right. And also the lack of committee recommendations this year. You're obviously just trying to push through things. I mean, that 67 people can decide a 2/3, on a very important thing is just not democracy at all.
To that point, Mr. Chair, I would encourage everyone to show up to town meeting because there is no limit on the number of people who can come. And we certainly encourage the town of Wellfleet to show up.
If you thought that we could, you would quorum.
No.
And Saturdays are very busy days for working people.
Okay, so just for the record, last year's town meeting, it was 280, I think it's
286.
86 that came. The issue is maintaining quorum later into the meeting. Brewster had their town meeting, as our former town administrator can attest, because he's the town moderator in Brewster. They lost their quorum late into the meeting. And basically the business town meeting had to be, they had to have an additional date to address the outstanding items. And so I just wanted that to be clear to everybody. But Carol Ridley, if you could, about the Herring River Restoration Project for the final design for the Tuquesta Neck Road dike or bridge.
Mr. Chairman, could I, before the testimony?
Sure.
So based on some tentative advice I've received from the State Ethics Commission, I'm going to abstain on this vote, and I should have a final answer from them soon. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, Carol.
All right. Good evening, everyone. Carol Ridley, Project Coordinator for the Herring River Restoration Project. So as the chair noted, we're here to speak to you tonight to provide you with an update on the final design for the Tuquesta Neck Road Bridge, and also to talk about the bidding process for that structure. The Tuquesta Neck Road Bridge is one of the components of the Herring River Restoration Project, but a primary component. The project, of course, designed to address the severe tidal restriction caused by the dike that is presently in that location in the 3-bay culvert system that's resulted in the degradation of water quality and loss of estuarine habitat, loss of resilience of the marsh and subsidence of the marsh. So the bridge and sluice gates that are a part of the bridge design, are a key component of the Herring River Restoration Project, and the main sort of tidal control structure necessary to restore tidal flow to the river system, and which is necessary for returning it to a healthy state. And therefore, as state and federal grant dollars are becoming available for construction, this project element has been identified as being the first for construction. So we've been working very closely over many months with the DPW Director Jay Norton, who's also here with us remotely, on the design, on the bidding process, on various construction management issues. But I would like to note, before we get into the design discussion, that this design has really resulted from many years of work and input from a number of multiple experts, an extensive assessment of alternative designs, beginning with the environmental impact assessment that was a state and federal process back around 2016. And then that design has been refined over the subsequent years through many discussions with town officials, through public forums, many other evaluations, and has been thoroughly vetted through project permitting with local, regional, state, federal agencies, including Mass DOT, US Coast Guard, US Army Corps. The bridge is designed by Fuss & O'Neill, which is a major international engineering firm with extensive experience with similar types of projects across the country. Nils Wieberg is with us this evening. He's been the lead engineer on this project. He's Chief Water Resources Engineer with Fuss & O'Neill. He's going to provide you with the final design update. And then I believe Jay is going to join in and talk a little bit about the process going forward with the bid advertisement and construction oversight. I'd also note that Kirk Bosma with Woods Hole Group is with us remotely. Woods Hole Group has also played a key role in the design through the hydrodynamic analysis that went into the design of the tidal control elements. So with that, Nils, thank you.
Okay, thank you again for the opportunity to speak and share the work that we've done, as Carol has noted, with many others within the community. I just want to start with perhaps the slides And the first one that I'd like to speak about is the design criteria that established the framework within which we developed the design for this structure. We started our work in 2012. We advanced through to public meetings. Thank you. And we outlined our criteria that establish goals to provide the benefits to the community and the environment. And as Carol noted, foremost among those is to provide what we call an adaptive control that allows adjustments to be made in the opening size as observations are made and monitoring is conducted so that we can optimize the performance of the structure and restoring tidal inundation to the estuarine environment to support restoration of the vegetative fisheries, shellfish and wildlife communities. Through those physical processes of flushing, sediment transport, monitoring will be conducted. The design that Woods Hole Group has done for the hydraulic flushing up into the system has accounted for sea level rise projection. So this is a resilient structure that has been designed. We've been very diligent in trying to establish controls that are minimize the operation and maintenance requirements without compromising the functional requirements that we have established, while also managing the costs to build and operate the structure. Obviously, the environmental permitting reviews were very intensive, and so we sought to minimize those impacts. We know that this is a very beautiful site that is beloved by many people within the community, so we have strived to make it a structure that is as congruent to the environment as possible, given the scale of it that is required for the restoration of the natural environment. We know that this is also a place that the public likes to go to visit. There's not a place to park to go out onto those viewing platforms to fish. So we wanted to improve the accessibility within the structure itself and also access to the water adjacent to the structure. So on the next slide, we just show a layout here of looking. So this is with Wellfleet Harbor to the bottom of the slide, and Herring River up at the top of the slide. And you can see the structure here, and I could get up away from the mic to point, but I'll describe on the right-hand side is the bridge. It's 165 feet long, approximately, with 10-foot high hydraulic openings, with a number of gates and panels that I'll show you on my subsequent slides. The next structures to the left on the slide are canoe and kayak portage structures. So people that are on paddlecraft that are approaching the structure while the gates are in place can take out, carry up over the road and put back in upstream or in the opposite direction as well. If you continue to the left, you'll see a pathway that is an ADA accessible path and boardwalk facility. We have a parking facility at the extreme left that provides ADA accessible public parking. That is at the intersection of Duck Harbor Road and Tuquesta Neck Road. Again, that has been developed with consideration for the environment as well to enhance access for ADA users who would like to get up into the river system that cannot do so currently. So on the next slide, we show an elevation view looking, if you were standing in the harbor and you were looking up towards the river, this is what you would see. This is obviously color coded so that we can point out these different elements. But essentially it's a 3-span bridge. And on the 2 outer spans, we have some solid panels that hold back the water and single slide gates that simply move up and down based upon the protocol established in the monitoring and adaptive control plan. Within the center span, we have a combination of slide gates that move simply vertically up and down and combination slide flap gates. We have 2 of those that allow water to move on the ebb flow towards the harbor preferentially, but restrict flow moving up into the river. So again, we have the functional controls to be able to make the hydraulic modifications that we see to optimize the performance of the bridge structure itself. On the next slide, I just have a rendering that shows what the bridge in concept would look like. Again, we're trying to implement color tones that are congruent to the site itself. But you can see that the panels are in place on the two outer bays and the gates are partially open. So this is what it would look like if a person were approaching the bridge on a paddlecraft. They would have a sign that would direct them to the portage and up and over, coming from either side of the bridge. If you go on to the next slide, please, you'll see that this is a view of the bridge looking oblique from Griffin Island south. And it shows the parking stalls that are incorporated into the bridge. These are parallel parking spaces. There are 8 parking spaces that would be outside of the traffic lane that are incorporated into the design. We have crosswalks that have been incorporated so that people can safely cross from one platform to the other. The platforms themselves are ADA accessible. And you can also see the gate structures themselves that rise up above the elevation of the deck, just due to the size of the openings, the 10-foot high openings that are required. I also just want to point out the rain gardens. These are provided for stormwater quality improvements. The water that runs down from the hillsides onto the bridge will be directed into these so that the water can be treated through the percolation. We also have some other offsite infiltration practices that will further improve the water quality of the Herring River and the bay. On the next slide, we have a presentation of what the bridge would look like, again, in this rendering with all the panels removed. The goal, of course, of the project is to incrementally increase the hydraulic opening sizes of all the gates. And as those openings become larger and larger, ultimately, if a decision is made by the Herring River Executive Council to remove all the panels so that the water could more freely or most freely move up and down the river in support of the restoration objectives, then that would also provide free passage for paddlecraft moving upstream or downstream. Okay, so I just wanted to, with that kind of overview, move on to the design issues and the process that we've been working very closely with the Herring River technical team, the DPW director and others within the town. And we are at the stage under the grant funding now, which is MVP grant funding, the vulnerability program funding, to complete our final drawings and specifications by June 30th. We have provided draft drawings and specifications to the larger partner team as well as the town. And I know that Jay is reviewing that. We do have meeting planned to receive input, comments. We welcome the input and comments so that we can, again, put a design together that is ready for bidding, as Jay will outline. So in terms of the provisions for post-construction operation and maintenance, there are some elements that are out there. If you go out there, you'll see a timber structure that houses equipment. There are other instruments that are out there that are monitoring the water parameters. Those would be needed post-construction. So we're working with the partner team to determine what those facilities would be that we would incorporate, one of which I'll outline here in the bottom of the slides. We have exterior treatments, again, to make the structure congruent to the natural environment. I'll talk about that. We're incorporating timber pedestrian railings so that, again, we're using natural materials to be more congruent to the environment. There is an enclosure, as I noted, for gate controls. These are all electrically operated gates. There's a portable generator that would be brought to the site to power those controls, since the electrical service is not of sufficient capacity to power the gates. And so that will be discussed. Obviously, benches and planters. There will be additional planters out there to provide vegetation and places for people to sit and enjoy the environment, as well as some other aesthetic treatments that could be incorporated into the bridge design. Again, so that we don't have gleaming white concrete out there. We want to make it very, congruent to the natural environment. All of the stone armor that is out there on the harbor side and to a limited extent on the river side, it's like an orange or reddish stained stone. That same stone will be put back adjacent to the flanks of the bridge. And so our thinking and conversations are oriented to see how we can blend that in, as I'll outline here in the next slide. So in terms of the exterior treatment of the surface of the bridge, we have options of using what's called a stone cladding. So you have a concrete base structure, but then you can put cut stone on the exterior face. There's different colors, textures, patterns that could be used. Again, we chose something of an ashlar, which is kind of a rectangular for the scale of the bridge. And again, something of a coastal sand, again, that has colors that would be matching, if you will, to the mud line, as well as to the sand and to the revetment stones that will be placed back. I show some pictures here. Another conventional treatment is concrete form lining. So when they pour the concrete, they have these patterns. The concrete forms to the pattern of the form. And then afterwards, they stain it in the different colors. That's another technique that can be used. It is a less expensive option. It doesn't have the same durability and life cycle but you get a higher cost and a more authentic and permanent natural appearance with the stone cladding. And so the way that we've developed it is to have within the base bid of the bridge, the stone cladding would be carried. And then we'll have an alternate bid for the concrete stained form liner. So again, the town, Jay has the opportunity to look at the bids. And of course, the funding is being provided for the construction. So the funding agencies would have a say, and there would be a collaborative decision about which option to include and proceed with. On the next slide, I just show, again, just timber railings. I have outlined the location of the railings within the footprint of the bridge. These would obviously protect persons from falling. We've incorporated a 3-rail horizontal railing system. Again, a wood material is something that can be maintained as needed by the town. It has to meet all the code requirements, which it is designed to do. And again, we used a tapered post to, again, have it more of a period appearance as opposed to just vertical posts. On the next slide, I just show a couple of pictures on the left of the equipment that is out there monitoring the water parameters right now. So we have over here on the top right-hand corner, I drew the rectangle on the portion of the bridge at the far south end, I guess the southwest corner of the bridge, and then highlighted on the inset, the magnified view of that corner of the bridge, the location of the gate controls. So we've envisioned that there could be some timber structure that could be positioned there to house those gate controls, as well as to house monitoring equipment that would be out there. All of the overhead electrical and communication utilities are going to be buried into the ground and routed through the deck of the bridge. So those would no longer be overhead. An electrical service could be brought out of that so that we would not need the solar panels there that power the instruments. Again, that would be an element that we would incorporate with the agreement of the partner team and the town and others. So that's just one style. That's not the structure that we've picked out, but it's an example of a structure that we would seek to specify in the bidding documents. As we move on to the next slide, we have some just depictions of the planters and benches. We've selected ADA compliant benches that are recycled plastic with the planters that have a reservoir of water. So again, it would minimize the O&M of filling the water. We've talked about provisions that could be used with our stormwater treatment devices to possibly bring water up to recycle water that is stored in those treatment and infiltration devices. I have in the bottom left-hand corner the general layout of the benches and planters that would be on both viewing platforms. And again, we're working with the partners and the town on the selection of the plant species that we would obviously want to be hardy for this environment. On the next slide, I just show this is a Mass DOT required concrete safety barrier. This is to prevent vehicles from moving out of the vehicle lanes and either going off the bridge or moving into pedestrian areas. Again, these are required by Mass DOT. We want to make them as congruent to the bridge and the environment as possible. So again, we're exploring either a pigmenting or a staining option that could, take a white concrete and make it something that is more of an earth tone. And again, that just, looks natural to the environment there itself. So I've outlined the locations of these on the bridge plan in the yellow highlighting that you see. Okay, so I'm just going to move here to the timeline that we've envisioned. This is obviously a large capital project. It's going to take significant resources to construct. And the timeline I've outlined here begins at the top with the construction of a temporary bypass bridge. This is a single lane bridge with alternating signals at both ends so that these are sensors that detect vehicles that are approaching, and that time to allow vehicles to move in alternating directions. There is also provision for pedestrians or bike users to be able to utilize this temporary bridge structure that would more or less take a detour around the area of construction. We expect that that would be constructed and in place by mid next year, 23, assuming that we are able to initiate construction this fall. With the temporary bypass bridge in place, we would then envision that the southern portion of the bridge in phase 2 would be constructed by mid 23 into the winter of 23. That would be the abutments and the piers for that portion of the structure that would be in place by that point in time. Once that southern structure is in place, the flow of the river will be moved through that new construction where it had been through the existing structures. With that southern portion built, the water will now flow through the southern portion, and then we will proceed to build the northern portion of the bridge, the pier and the abutment, and the portage structures that would be in place at that point in time, and that would extend into the summer of 24. And then finally, once all the substructures, the piers and abutments are in place, then we would construct the superstructure, the deck of the bridge, and all the other surface structures associated with Duck Harbor Road and the the water access facility from Duck Harbor Road, and then do the repaving, and then the bridge would be ready for use in the spring, we envision, of 25. So I think that is everything that I had, and then perhaps Jay would speak.
Yes, I think for the next slide, Jay, if Jay's available. Jay.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, great. Thank you, Nils, very much for that overview. And thank you, Carol, for introducing the team in the inception of the project. So I'm just going to be going over the construction management piece of this project and the oversight. So as Nils stated, we're looking to wrap up the 100% design plans and specifications by June 30th, which will position us hopefully to advertise the bid package in early July 2022. Going into contractor selection and contract negotiations by August and September of 2022, and then hopefully site mobilization and vegetation work late fall of 2022 and winter of 2023. Obviously, these are subjected to change, but this is the tentative schedule as we've constructed it so far. Another exciting piece of this that we've been working on, we have a internal working group that we've been meeting with every week to develop a scope of work for an owner's project representative. We call it the OPR, that will basically act as a liaison between the town and the contractors and design engineers during this process when construction is underway. And this is all grant funded, and I think it will be a really good thing for the town to have this. They'll basically, they'll act as a liaison, attending meetings, they'll do grant administration, basically a major construction management role, which is definitely needed with this level of construction and the undertaking of this project. So we're excited about that. We've been meeting with local, state, and federal experts. We have a project team that we've been developing the scope. So we're hoping to issue that RFP soon. And then lastly, the construction bids will also be reviewed for compliance by Fuss & O'Neill. So Nils and his project team will be reviewing the bids and then providing their input for the town.
Great, so that's, that sort of concludes our overview, and would be happy to answer any questions.
Sure. I have some. So do we know what the cost is for the owner's project representative?
We are gathering information to assess that. As Jay noted, this would be a grant-funded position, so assuming the town executes a grant agreement with the Natural Resource Conservation Service, which has offered the funding for the project in the amount of 29 million, 5 million of that is for various project management kinds of activities that this would fall under. So we're confident that the grant funding will be there for the owner's project manager position.
Okay, and would that position not be limited to just the bridge?
Correct. So the scope that's being put together encompasses all of the various project elements that are going to be under construction.
Okay, and Jay, when you spoke about going out to bid, was that specific to just the bridge itself?
He's muted.
Yes, for this summer, that's correct.
Okay. All right. And then, so you mentioned that there's a electric generator to operate. It sounds like the raising of and lowering of the panels, because the electrical facilities on site are not adequate. Where would that be placed on the bridge?
So at the south end of the bridge is an enclosure that houses all of the cabinets. So within the string of parking spaces, there's 8 parking spaces, and then there's a 9th space that is diagonally hashed with paint. That's reserved for a trailer mounted generator that would be furnished as part of the project. The specifications for that generator is in the bid. So that would be, again, furnished to the town. There would be commissioning, there'd be training. That would be mobilized to the site when needed. It would be operated, connected to the gate controls, and then they would provide 3-phase power, whereas single-phase power is only available overhead.
So with that arrangement, it's not possible to raise and lower the gates in response to storm events?
So the gates are can be also operated manually with a hand wheel. You know, obviously they're large gates, and so there are devices that can be brought that are power operated that can hook onto the nut that would turn the hand wheel. So there are redundant measures to allow the gates to be operated if needed under a certain storm circumstance.
Okay. And then just a few things. First is the pigmenting the concrete. That doesn't make any sense to me. I don't know why we would want pink, pink concrete. Just plain concrete is fine. I don't know.
Yeah, I agree with you. I'm sorry, I'm speaking out of turn. Pink, no, just gray, okay? May I say?
Yeah.
That is a natural color around here. And whenever you're done, Ryan, may I please be recognized?
Sure. I mean, it looks more like sand, right?
Well, no, gray is the way the sky is, the way the water reflects. I have this other job, which is I'm a visual artist who worked from life for a long time. That doesn't mean I know anything except about color. I do know, and I grew up here. So 2 things that I'm very concerned about. This is like in the raw, beautiful part of the town that's in the National Seashore, pretty much. And what we do not need, in my opinion, for a lot of reasons, are planters with flowers in them. We need it. It's not the center of town. We don't need frills. We particularly don't need frills that the town will then be left with maintenance for. And I know something about planters, and they have to be able to drain. And what we really don't want is any kind of fertile soil washing through and draining right there, because it's enough with the closures for shellfish.
okay, with stuff like that. We don't need to eat it there, add it there. And a nice piece of engineering without frills is always a beauty to behold. So the second thing is, and this is very much also about maintenance, having planters, because we'll be maintaining it. Somebody has to truck water out there. I mean, please, no, please. This is just me. I don't know about the rest of them. The second thing is this. What's wrong with nice, smooth, because it's engineering, well-shaped, non-clad concrete for the bridge structure? Because the cladding, there are all these, I just see the DPW having to pay contractors to repoint those as they start coming off. And the other thing about the staining, and you know, you showed the revetments, those boulders, they didn't come from around here. They're not natural. They're stained by the water, by the way. And they actually, for me, visually refer to revetments, which are a very mixed blessing in this town and very controversial because of what happens next to revetments and so forth. So those two things aesthetically would really, really matter to me, at least. I'd like to hear from the rest of the board. But I mean, planters, I mean, it's nice to offer us everything, but no, thank you.
Mike?
Yeah, well, the planters were meant to stormwater runoff. Is that what they were? So to capture stormwater runoff and then basically treat it in a way. I don't have a problem with that, especially if they're perennial plants that are drought tolerant or the correct kind of plantings in those things. I think it makes sense rather than having our storm runoff just drain right into the water. So I'm in favor of doing that. And having, you know, appropriate plants in there for the environment, because water runoff is from roads is generally bad to go into an estuary. So if there's a way to capture it and drain it through a filtration system with plants, I think it's a good idea. As far as cladding, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the cladding that's shown here. I know there's various types of cladding that, you know, are maybe not so linear and kind of out of place. I think this kind of looks a little or suburban, urban type of wall cladding, but you know, each to their own. It's a personal decision, but something that looks a little less linear, I think, as far as cladding goes. But I also don't have a problem with raw concrete material. I think, you know, it gets colored by the sea, and you know, it has its own sort of natural, I wouldn't say natural, but you know, it is what it is. It's not pretending to be anything else. And there's something, you know, aesthetically pleasing about that to me. But you know, those are decisions that I think will come up and be made. But as far as the bridge is concerned, overall, I think it looks like an amazing structure, the functionality of it, and the tidal gates, those are opening like vertically. So they'll open vertically. So it's still, when water is receding or coming in, it'll be coming in through the bottom of the gate. So correct. So does that resolve, like, I guess this is maybe a question for Martha, or I don't know, would that resolve the dilution problem? Because part of the problem right now is that water doesn't recede out of the river until it gets down to the culvert, basically, which is lower than the high water mark. So basically, by the time that the water has receded out of the harbor, that's when we start having drainage from the river basin. And I guess my concern is that that continues until the gates are open, that we still have a problem with water not being diluted coming into the low tide system, rather than, that's my question.
Carol?
Well, I'll just note that the the Executive Council, the Herring River Executive Council has adopted the initial tide gate management policy for the first 3 years of restoration, which would, in the first year, sort of in a stepwise manner, allow water level to increase 1.8 feet and then keep it there for 2 years, during which time monitoring will happen to just, see how the system's responding to that reintroduction of tidal flow. That at that level, however, which 1.8 doesn't sound like a large number, but it's a large enough number to begin to overtop the creek beds and start that restoration process. So I think that's been borne out by the hydraulic analysis. I don't know if there's any more to add about that, but that's the initial tide gate management policy.
Mike, anything else?
Yeah, I guess when they open that to that level, will that be like one gate open at a how?
Yeah, I think there are different gate configurations that can do that. I'm not sure that the exact configuration of the gates is worked out, but or maybe even Kurt wants to address that question if he's listening.
Who?
Kirk Bosma? I don't know if he would need to be unmuted.
Well, before he answers, I guess I had always sort of thought that the gates were going to be opened sort of laterally so that they allowed water to flow from the high water mark of the river out. And I guess maybe that should not a concern at all. I don't know. Maybe Martha has.
Okay. Kirk, you should be unmuted.
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for the questions. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
Sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Uh-oh.
So yeah, I mean, a couple things about the flow and the flow control. So the mixing and the availability to let water both in and out of that system is going to be vastly improved. In fact, a couple of the gates are actually, not only do they slide up and down, but they also flap. So you'll be able to allow more water out than in, and vice versa through the controls there. So you'll see vastly improved mixing of that system, improved water quality right off the bat because of the ability of these structures. In terms of how it's going to be open initially, there's a lot of different scenarios that get you the right water levels in there. I don't envision it's going to be one gate. I think it's going to be spread out more across the system to allow that flow. But there's a lot of different options and adaptable approaches that you can implement in that system to allow that flow. I think you're going to see a really big improvement in water quality and flushing in the system just right off the bat.
That was the nature of my question.
Mr. Wolf?
Yeah, I share Helen's concerns about the fact that the town is going to be responsible for the ongoing maintenance. So certain aspects of this that look good on paper are going to be a continuing responsibility for our DPW. And among those is the wooden railing that I saw depicted. I wondered if we could get Jay Norton's take on what he envisions going forward as to what the costs might be and how durable such a setup would be. And I'm also opposed to the notion of having cladding on these bridges. I think that's just a maintenance headache waiting in the wings.
Mr. Norton?
Sure, thanks. So yeah, we've had, extensive discussions about the materials to be used, the engineering attributes and all that. And my preference was to have wood railings to mimic what's there now. There's wood railings there now. They're easy to maintain. If there's any type of concrete structure or steel structure, it's a little harder to maintain. Obviously, with deterioration and spalling of concrete, it can get expensive. Steel, obviously, rusting and all that gets expensive. So I think it's something that we can easily manage, and it lasts for a while. And to me, personally, it looks better, the appearance of a timber railing versus wood or, steel or concrete.
This is a very different concern. I don't know if this is the right time and format for addressing it or not, but it goes to the overall effects of, once this is all in operation and the gates are beginning to be lifted and so on. And I haven't seen anything addressed, but I've been, since shortly before I ran for the board, and since I've been on the board, I've had a number of shell fishermen address these concerns to me, which has to do with what happens if their aquaculture operations in the Herring River should be compromised by outflow of sediment, for instance, that might not have been anticipated. My understanding is that there's no provision in any of this, or has been no discussion that I'm aware of overall liability. Is that going to rest with the town?
So Carol, if you can answer that, but we do have to kind of limit our conversation tonight to.
Okay, that's why I wasn't sure if this was the right.
Carol.
Well, I would invite Kirk Bosma to address that question because that issue has been raised and in extensive conversations with the Shellfish Advisory Board. The project undertook additional analysis of that question, and Kirk led that analysis. So I don't know if it's within the scope of your discussion this evening, but we have that information available and have presented it to the Shellfish Advisory Board.
It's not, we'll have to take that up at a future agenda.
Okay, that's why I asked.
So
we can share that information with you separately if that would be okay.
Oh, and two more quick questions about the structure.
Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, one is, I'm not seeing any reference to catch basins that will treat water, because the real issue after rain events for shell fishing is runoff, and it comes from the pavement. And Mike, the storm runoff will not be captured by the planters. They're up, and the real so catch basins, and then something, one other question.
There's a quick answer to that, if you can.
Yeah, so there are two types of I'll call them planters. There are the 4 primary planters that are below the elevation of the road. So anything that comes down on the road surface goes into deep sump hooded catch basins to do primary treatment. Then they go to oil grit chambers to further treat the water. And then they flow into the planters themselves for infiltration, which is further treatment, tertiary treatment. The planters that are above the deck I understand your concern, and those would not obviously provide any stormwater treatment, and they're not intended to.
Okay, well, personally, I would just prefer regular catch basins that treat. But the other question is, and this has come up repeatedly the first time at a very intense early Shellfish Advisory Board meeting, is I still see no indication of a slight break in the guardrail on the landward side upstream so that people could go down that embankment. Because at some point, perhaps, if the flushing is really going to do what we think it's going to do, we may be able to harvest shellfish up there. We wouldn't be able to have a farm, it's in the park, but people could harvest shellfish up there if the flushing really works. And they would need to be able to go down on that side.
The rendering may not have shown it, but we do have a staircase that goes on the south side of the bridge, the mainland side of the bridge, on the upstream side of the embankment down to the water. So we did hear that and we did address it.
Yay, thank you.
Mr. DeVasta and then Ms. Bacon.
Sure, I just would also raise the point that we are responsible currently for the maintenance and upkeep of the dike right now, which is in a close to failed state and going to cost the town a lot of money in the near future to deal with. And it did fail in the 70s. And we do know that during that time period, there was a positive impact on shellfish upriver and around the area of the river. And also there's liability to the town as far as, well, we're not going into the shellfish thing right now, but I'll stay on topic, but we're responsible for the infrastructure currently of a failing system right now. And so this is timely and, you know, if you look at the big picture, saving the town a lot of money.
Okay, Ms. Bacon?
Good evening. I really appreciate the presentation tonight. It's the first detailed look we've had at this. And I kind of have a little sticker shock, I guess, because you're adding a level of, for sake of not knowing another word, gentrification to an area that we all know and love and has looked the same way for about 100 years. So I'm not in favor of planters. I prefer that you consider drainage swales and not, you know, some sort of material there. I'm wondering why we won't consider using iPay, Brazilian iPay on those railings. They're less to splinter. You know, it's very conceivable that this project, when finished, is going to become another tourist attraction for the town. Very conceivable. So how do we deal with that tourist attraction? With people porting kayaks or watercraft across the road? You know, how do we deal with that? Safety issues, if you will. You didn't give a number on how many in total parking spaces are going to be provided. And I guess last, we've just completed a complete redo of Lieutenant Island Bridge. You know, without using concrete. You know, it all went through DOT and yeah, we didn't use concrete there. So I don't know. Those are my concerns, but I you know, I can get used to change. You know, I can. We know this is going to change. How we manage that change going forward for the town, maintenance, safety, you know, how many people are going to be able to park out there? You know, those are concerns. Thank you.
Would you care to address any of those?
Well, I can just add that there are 8 spaces on the bridge itself, those parallel parking spaces, and 6 spaces at the Duck Harbor facility. And I would just speak with regard to the design of the stormwater treatment practices that are implemented. We're governed by stormwater treatment requirements. So we have to have certain percentage of treatment that obviously the limited space allows us to do that. So our range of options is limited. You know, we've worked very closely to try to minimize the impact and burden of O&M, but we are constrained by those requirements, and that what has led us to the design through the consultations that we've had. And I think lastly, in terms of the lateral hydraulic forces upon the bridge, very few structures can withstand those lateral forces that are not concrete. Certainly you could build a timber structure that could in theory, but it still has to pass Mass DOT muster. And so the Mass DOT requirements, it would be a very, very burdensome and perhaps infeasible endeavor to try to do that. So we've worked with conventional construction materials that we know the local construction market can provide the processes to construct at a cost that is within the capabilities of the funding.
Okay, so I have a concern. Yeah, I'll get to them. I've raised this before. I don't think since I've been on the board, I've raised it. I don't think the structure is being built high enough. The storm event that was used to generate basically the high water level is a storm of 78. Sea level's risen since then, and it's even projected since 2000 to 2030 it will in Massachusetts, it will have raised between half a foot to a foot, 1.1 feet. And that's only going to continue in the future. I know that there are other low-lying areas within the basin. Yeah, I mean, one of them is overwashing now. That's at Duck Harbor. The other one that is sometimes raised is across from Powers Landing. I would like to point out that Tuquesta Neck Road itself is the only means of access for this area of town. To base a design decision on conditions that are 50 years old is not really the best practice, in my opinion. And also, the assumption that the Tuquesta Neck Road at Powers Landing will always remain at the current elevation is a little bit presumptive. It's a presumption that it might be one of the adaptations that the town has to do is to raise that section of the road. So, and I, that's always been my issue with the structure. It should be at least 2 to 4 feet higher.
Right.
If you have any response, Colin.
Well, I mean, certainly I can provide an initial response. Kirk may have some additional thoughts, but elevating the structure, again, we're operating within a limited footprint that we cannot extend that footprint into the natural resources. So anytime you elevate something, you're expanding the footprint in order to do that. I would say also that the intent is to be resilient to any overtopping and any storm or flood conditions that arise. So that, again, we have engineered this roadway in the crest of the roadway to be able to withstand and be resilient to that overtopping should it occur.
Could I just invite Kirk to perhaps add any thoughts he might have on that topic?
Sure. Kurt?
Yeah, thank you. So a couple of things just to think about here. The storm of 78, even though it's old, is still, for this area, the storm of record. So there has not been, even with sea level rise, a higher total storm tide that's been reached. So it still is a historic storm of record. Now, the 2018 events of Grayson and Riley were very close to that, but it's not as if we're using a 50-year-old design level. That still is the highest level we've seen in Wellfleet. So that's one point. Second, we and myself, I'm the developer of the Massachusetts Coast Flood Risk Model, which is the climate change model and coastal model that's the state standard for the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. We did consider looking at specific elevational increases. Should be noted that this structure was not intended to be a storm control structure. It's a restoration tidal control structure. That being said, given the current condition of the dike, this does offer an improved storm protection system compared to a nearly failed dike that is there now. And the 12-foot elevation of the crest does still provide protection based on the projected sea level rise levels up to almost a 2070 100-year return period storm. So there is a fair amount of resiliency built into this. Sea level rise was definitely considered in the design of the actual structure for normal tidal conditions, because that's a huge influence on how the restoration is going to go forward. So there is ability to change the gate openings in a way that sea level rise inside the system can be mitigated and controlled. Thus, that's why we have those nonlinear gates in there to help that process. So yes, in the future, if you could go higher, you could go higher to protect against future climate change levels. There are those other entry pathways that you mentioned that are definitely concerned. Duck Harbor right now is starting to be a problem. So there's a lot of things to consider here. But the structure does have at least a 50-year to the 100-year return period level resiliency built into it.
Sure. But if, let's say, the storm of 78 happened tomorrow, the water levels that we would see would be higher than they were in 78. Correct? So that would essentially be the new storm of record, even though it's the same ultimate, storm force. Miss Wilson?
All this is true, Ryan, but we are not going to have a dike there. We are going to have a bridge. And the whole point is that even if sea level goes higher, which it will, we are restoring the sponge that is the estuary that will, in other words, if there is high water, it's going to go through, it's going to deposit sediment because the incoming tide always goes in faster and drops sediment on that, very subsided peat. And that sponge, which protects the whole area, is going to slowly be restored. And it will be able to accommodate because it's not stopping.
So
higher
if you
water.
can please.
Yeah, well, you talked well too, and I wanted to hear what you had to say.
I talked about the bridge.
I'm talking about the bridge now and what it will allow. And this is very important, and that I've heard about again and again and again in the technical team meetings, that it's going to have a whole different management of high water and storm water and, big seasonal tides than we have now, where if it happened tomorrow, a storm of record, it would be a problem because what we have now just would stop it and it would go over or, break it. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, Mr. Sayer?
Good evening, and thank you for the presentation. Question is, we're going to have a one-lane road for 2.5 to 3 years, and you're going to have red lights on both ends of it. Have you put in any kind of emergency response vehicle control so they can red light both sides so they don't have to wait?
Yes.
Okay, and then the other question is, it looks like it's 29 million, but 5 million is being held out for oversight. So we're talking about $24 million for the structure. What is the average, and I know this is not your first one, what's the average cost overrun on structures like this during a 3 to 4 year build period?
We have bid items. I agree that there's a lot of risk of a project of this scale and duration. We've developed a bid structure that incorporates unit price items so that we can, have control. So we're not governed by, at the whims of the contractor in a negotiating position. So we have a market-derived unit bid price for those things that are going to be most likely to change due to differing site conditions. So I think that's firstly, we are currently updating our opinion of costs based upon the Mass DOT unit weighted bid prices for the last quarter of this region. We know that there has been escalation, so we're accounting for that as well. I presume that the partners have contingencies in the funding and other avenues that could address an overrun should it occur.
Okay. Mr. Sayer?
I think she wanted to add something.
Oh, Carol?
I just wanted to clarify one thing. So when I referred earlier to the 29 million and the 24 and the 5, that's a proposed grant amount. I wasn't referring to the price of the bridge.
So what is the price of the bridge?
So that is the opinion of cost is being updated. And I think we're going to be talking about that at a later meeting.
We'll have a comprehensive financial plan presented on the 28th. I don't know if that includes the cost of the bridge or not. I don't have the documents. So.
one other. When Kathleen Bacon made the point about not using concrete, you said that there's a pressure situation with the water. But since we're going to have gates open, the pressure will be relieved more than it is now. So you're still saying that the pressure would be too great for a structure like that? It could be put in at a cheaper rate?
I think that using conventional concrete materials is the most efficient from a construction and cost standpoint way to withstand those lateral forces. We're operating in an environment of Mass DOT having Chapter 85 review responsibility. So everything that has to be designed to those standards. We're incorporating Mass DOT materials and details in the structure of the bridge. So when we start with a panel system that is mostly closed at the initial portion of the adaptive management, that's when those wave forces are going to be at their greatest in a lateral direction, either incoming or outgoing. And we've designed the system to withstand those lateral forces under a design storm event, again, either a coastal surge or an inland flood. So those are very, very significant forces that I am not a structural engineer, but I know from speaking with my team that this is the structure that will most capably and assuredly withstand those forces.
Yeah, well, thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Wolf and then Mr. DeVasto.
Assuming that some of the suggestions we've heard here as far as dispensing with some of the accoutrements like the fancier planters and planting and so forth, and going to a simpler and more straightforward swale system for dealing with rainwater. When we do come to a discussion of the overall cost, is there some chance we can get a picture of what that might reduce the costs by?
I think right now we're under a very short time frame for the end of June to complete our bid design. I think that there may be opportunities, perhaps in the future during the design of the temporary bridge to have those discussions and to make those adjustments. But again, that would be subject to the grant funding agreements.
Mr. DeVasto.
Just a couple quick, you had mentioned with the cladding that it offers more durability and less maintenance. Is that, so can you clarify that? And then I had one other question after that.
Yeah, so in terms of the materials and the workmanship, obviously that comes down to the level of the qualifications of the contractor. With any system in a coastal environment, there's going to be some degradation. We would not compromise on the materials or the methods used to construct it. The observation and oversight to assure the quality of the construction would be of the highest that could be provided. Nothing's perfect. I think that even a stain system is going to, as you noted, weather. Both of these systems are going to weather, and the ocean and the environment is going to do with it what it will. That's why we chose to incorporate an alternate for the concrete form lighting. So if that's a decision that the town would like to pursue, that's within the parameters of the bid at this time.
Yeah, I mean, I'd just like to say on the record, I'm not opposed to cladding it. Some on the board are, but then the other question I had fell by the wayside. I don't remember.
Sure.
Somewhere it's gone now.
So the staining that you just mentioned, I don't see the need to stain. Your proposal is to stain the concrete so it looks like stone, correct?
There's any types of treatments that could be used, and obviously one of the treatments is to not do anything and not stain it. And so certainly that's why we seek this input, and we appreciate this opportunity to have the feedback. And if there's a wider audience that would choose to share an opinion, I think that I speak for myself, I'd be very open to.
Yeah, and so there would be increased maintenance associated with the cladding system as opposed to a totally untreated cement surface.
Cement is going to be marine concrete, so it's going to be formulated to withstand the salt environment from freezing and thawing, but it's still going to undergo degradation. So no matter what type of surface treatment, you're going to have degradation and O&M. I think that we could look at a more detailed cost life cycle analysis and provide that information if that is so needed.
Yeah, I think that would be beneficial. And then I would just want to, for the record, the infiltration system that's proposed is the best solution. I mean, that's kind of the direction that things are going in for BMPs. It's providing a much greater degree of treatment than a swale would, and probably easier to maintain because it's more constrained. So, Ms. Ridley?
Thank you. And I did want to make a comment about the latitude we have to make changes on stormwater management for a couple of reasons, because that really affects our permitting. We've basically gone through permitting for this structure with the stormwater treatment that's proposed, and we're required to meet state stormwater standards. And also our funder, Natural Resource Conservation Service, has additional stormwater requirements. So I just want to be clear that, that's one issue where there's a little less latitude, I think, to make any large scale changes. Some of the other, I think what Nils, has suggested is that the bid package may include options for some things that the community may ultimately decide it doesn't want, but that's okay. Those can just be peeled out. Even if they're in the bid, they would be, they could not be opted for. I think that's the strategy that is proposed.
So you have a proposed motion here.
Yes.
To affirm the final design. In light of the comments made by the board, would that still be the appropriate motion?
I think what it actually is proposed is that the design is essentially as it's been presented to you this evening, but I think the acknowledgement is that there are certain of the aesthetic treatments that require further discussion. So I think that is part of what we're proposing this evening as part of this presentation. If you wish to, specify that in the motion, that's fine.
Okay, so I move to affirm the final design of Tuquesta Neck Road Bridge subject to further review of the aesthetic treatments applied thereto, and the DPW's intention to advertise bid documents for construction of the Tuquesta Neck Road Bridge as provided in the final design plans and bid specifications, and to advertise a grant-funded position of owner's project representative to provide construction oversight on the behalf of the town and to report to the DPW director and the town administrator.
Second.
Okay, can I have a roll call vote?
Michael, I.
Brian, I.
Barbara abstain.
I did have a question, but can I ask it?
Sure.
So we're not going to know how much the town is going to be responsible for in terms of construction costs until after.
So we'll get into that on the 28th. So that's outside of the scope of tonight.
This isn't putting the cart.
No.
Okay. All right, John, I.
I mean, we need to go to bid to have firm price estimates, essentially.
Okay, John, I.
Helen, I.
Okay, motion carries 4-0 with one abstention. So thank you. Have
Very
a good
much.
night. We'll
you.
see you in 2 weeks.
All right.
Is
Great,
it 2
thank you.
weeks only? 3 weeks.
3 weeks. Thank you.
So 95 Lawrence Road. Jay, are you still with us? Let's see. Oh, muted.
I am.
All right. So Rebecca said that she's unable to attend tonight. So if you could, can you just very briefly present on this?
Sure. Let me pull this up.
Sure, it's 95 Lawrence Road for the on-site engineering for the wastewater treatment facility, permitting and groundwater discharge.
Yeah, so Rebecca asked me to review the RFP for this and the proposal. And considering the, the expertise of on-site engineering and their involvement with this project for more than a year, if not more, that their expertise and, the attributes of their proposal seemed in line and acceptable to, standards of engineering right now. So I was in favor and recommendation of awarding the contract to them. I didn't see any glaring issues with them. I've always been impressed when I've met with David, and I feel like they're the guys for the job.
Okay, so I move to approve the proposed contract amendment for 95 Lawrence Road wastewater treatment facility permitting and groundwater discharge wastewater treatment facility design and permitting.
John, second.
Second.
Okay, roll call vote, please.
John, I.
Barbara, I.
Brian, I.
Michael, I.
Okay.
Karen, I.
Okay, motion carries 5-0. So the disbandment of 95 Lawrence Road Task Force. So this is something that Olga Khan brought up. She was or is currently the liaison to the task force. And we checked with Rebecca Roughly, the assistant town administrator, and she said that the task force's charge is complete and that it should be disbanded. So I don't think there would be much discussion here. I just really want to thank everybody who worked on that task force and getting to the project where it is now. That's going to be it is critical. It was critical. Housing is a continued need throughout. So at this point, I'd move to approve the disbandment of 95 Lawrence Road Task Force effective immediately as the original charge has been fulfilled.
John, second.
Okay, can I have a roll call vote?
John, I.
Barbara, I.
Brian, I.
Michael, I, and I'd just like to also thank Kathleen.
I was just going to do that after the
her
motion.
work on
Yep.
there and the incredible RFP that brought us the bids that we got, which really we were so fortunate to get. So.
Helen, okay.
And what Mike said.
Yep, I was gonna thank you as well. So, yeah, well, be careful. So, motion carries 5-0. Mr. DeVasto, to discuss and vote on resident taxpayer parking at LeCount Hollow, McGuire Beach for the 2022 season.
Point of order.
Sure. Can you speak into a mic?
Last week, this was brought up by the board. It wasn't approved. It had 2 no votes and 2 yes votes, which means it did not pass. To bring it back up, one of the 2 no votes would have to bring it back up, not someone that was in the yes vote, and Mr. Vasta was not present, okay, for that vote. Under the Roberts Rules of Order, that's what it states, and I believe this board runs under Roberts Rules of Order. Okay, so I don't believe you can bring it up again. Also, to bring up an issue that was voted down, because that's what it was, a week later doesn't speak to the conformity of the board. But I'm going to bring up the point of order. I did talk to you the other night about it, so I know hopefully you've had time to review that with KP. Thank you.
Sure. So I actually checked on this. So for reconsideration, it does require one of the dissenting votes to make a motion and reconsider. However, only within the meeting that vote occurred. Votes that are subsequent to that meeting are not subject to that reconsideration of requiring one of the dissenting votes to reconsider or to make the motion to reconsider the item. It's, and this is, I mean, this is kind of similar. It's slightly different than what we held the public hearing for, which is basically a permanent amendment to the beach rules and regulations. But anyways, so it is something that the board can consider tonight under Robert's rules. So thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I was one of the dissenting votes, and something that should be communicated is, since that time, we have gotten a lot of email, very considered, careful email testimony. And I had one very good conversation with a woman called Rhonda Fowler, whose attentiveness and civility and precision changed my perspective. So even if that was true, yeah, I would like to bring it back, and I welcome the opportunity to reconsider this matter because we really have heard a lot about it in the last couple of weeks. Thank you.
Sure. And just to be clear, it's not to amend the beach rules and regulations. It's
right.
Yep. Okay.
Yeah.
Mr. DeVasto?
Yeah, this is really just to continue this for the 2022 season. The purpose really to preserve access to the Oceanside Beach for residents and taxpayers, particularly working people who have limited time to access the beach during busy season. We know that people who work don't have time to commit 6 hours to the beach most of the time. People want to get to the ocean side, hop in between tides or a break in their work schedule. You sometimes can't get into the ocean. One of the things that's occurred at LeCount Hollow Beach is a high turnover of vehicles in that parking lot because of it being resident taxpayer. We don't see the same kind of thing that we see at Newcomb Hollow, where people basically get in line at 9 or 10 in the morning, the lot fills up and people don't leave for 4 to 6 hours. That's so it is a different use. And I would also note, this isn't a change in the regulations. And I'd like to bring that to town meeting for a non-binding vote in the fall, so that we just do have the support of our residents to continue to do this. But I'd also note that Dennis has 5 resident-only beaches. Barnstable has 8 resident-only beaches. I didn't go through all the beaches, but those are ones that I know about. So this isn't something unusual to Wellfleet. And, you know, really, I think it's been a great benefit to the community and the people who pay taxes here. And we forget every year how busy and stressful it can be those 2 months of the summer to actually get to that side of our town and enjoy, you know, the natural resource that we have and we pay for as taxpayers and residents. And it is open to all property owners, not just residents that live here. So I'd hope that the board would vote this tonight, and then we could bring a non-binding vote to town meeting in the fall to bring up a change in regulation. I never really intended to change the regulation on a permanent basis without doing that. So this is what I had hoped to bring up, and I apologize for not being at that meeting because I was on my way back from New Brunswick and Northern Maine and I did get on the meeting, but it just kept cutting out. So I couldn't participate. So unfortunately that happened. So
would you care to advance the motion?
I move to approve that LeCount Hollow McGuire Landing be used for resident and taxpayer parking for the 2022 season. I should say only resident and taxpayer only parking for the 2022 season.
Helen, second.
Okay. Can I have a roll call vote?
Yeah, I think I'll change my vote on that.
Aye.
Barbara, I.
Brian, I.
Michael, I.
Ellen, I.
Okay, motion carries 5-0. So and I know Suzanne also wanted clarification before the beach sticker season really kicked off.
Good case for it, Mike.
So we have zoning bylaws amendments. It's getting fairly late. We'll have to move on these basically by the end of June. So I just want to know where the board is right now for tonight.
This require a great deal of discussion.
I don't know. So,
Why don't we give it a try?
Ms. Wilson?
So, apparently there was a markup from town council on these bylaws. And, you know, you remember my support for them, the content.
Yeah,
right?
that their town council's responses are incorporated into them.
Okay, but we never saw that. I don't see where town council, what they suggested. And I always like a clean copy, so I'm not objecting to that. But that stage in the process, I think, is important. And also, these were generated mainly by you, Ryan, and they're good. And I feel there's nothing wrong with that. Any one of us could, you know, advance a document, you know, zoning bylaw regulation. But my
Can we
point
speak
is,
to,
I
as
think
to whether
I
or not we'll take them up tonight?
yes,
Ellen?
that's what
Okay.
I'm going to do. If you stop, you know, telling me to do something I'm about to do. We're hilarious. It's like, you know, the Marx Brothers. Okay, so I really think these could use more work. And we have someone who is professionally, you know, trained to look at zoning bylaws, whether or not Barbara.
Okay, so your
So
answer
I'm-
is that you prefer us not to take it up tonight. Mr. DeVasso?
And also not to have it on the warrant, if you'd let me
No,
finish.
so this would be for the special town meeting warrant, Ms. Wilson.
Well, but it's in the,
No.
Got removed from the warrant.
oh, it has.
Yes, we moved all of these.
That's what I thought.
Yeah.
And then I looked at
So,
it. and
so
there it
if,
was.
can we,
Listen, I don't have any problem with this, but I don't think we have to move on it tonight, and it's getting late. And if it's going to be a discussion, I would just prefer to, I don't think it's, to me, this is not a complicated thing. We're allowing the use year round.
I agree with Mike. I think we should deal with this tonight. I don't see what is so complicated
okay,
about it.
Ms. Carbone?
I think it is complicated, and I would rather, since we do have time, that we defer discussion on it, because I think these are really important, really good efforts, but it's worth our spending time. I would just ask for clarification where we are in the process, whether we will be voting to refer whatever is the product, we will be referring that to the planning board for their hearing.
Sure, so we'll submit them to the planning board for the hearing. The select board is one of the, well, actually, so zoning bylaws is supposed to be submitted to the select board and then submitted, the select board acts on them and submits them to the planning board for a hearing. Two of them have already been submitted to the planning board, but they failed to hold a public hearing within 65 days. So it's created a procedural defect. So I've been asked to resubmit them, and one of them incorporates town council's responses that were germane to it as well. So should be a better bylaw overall because of that.
Okay, yeah, that would be my preference, Mr. Chairman, is to
Okay.
defer discussion. If we could.
Okay with
I'm
that.
fine with that. I'd rather not have a long conversation about it again. I mean,
At 10:30 tonight.
Right.
especially, we've already done it once prior to Barbara being on the board
Mhm.
too, so this is, we might as well wait and then,
And we can bring her expertise in.
yeah,
Or might, thank you, my participation, but
Yeah,
again, it's.
agreed. Yeah,
it's-
if we're, yeah. if we're
Even
gonna
for me,
discuss
it's,
it,
yeah, even for me, it's late to discuss zoning.
Yep.
so.
Let's not do
So
it.
does that cover all of these?
Yeah, all three of them. One of them is actually really simple and the other two are a little bit more extensive. So I don't think we have any collective bargaining agreements to bring out of executive session.
Not at this point, no.
All right, just making sure, because the building use policy, we're also going to put off as well.
Get that out to everybody.
Yep, so, yeah, 28th is looking packed already. Town administrator and assistant town administrators report. So how are your first days in office, Mr. Waldo?
Well, I'll keep it brief because it is getting late. I will say I've been on the job for 1 week now, technically 5 days. And in those 5 days, I've attended 2 public forums, 2 regular select board meetings, 1 executive session. I met individually with most, if not all, senior staff at this point. I have participated in 2 collective bargaining. So, to say the least, it's been a full week. And one thing that I can take away from my experience here is, we have a good staff. We have a good, caring staff that cares for the success of this town. They wake up every day, their charge is to serve. I think one thing that they want is leadership. They're looking for leadership, and I'm hoping to fill that void. I've had a lot of good conversations with them, and I think we have a good team here, and I look forward to working with them in the future. With that said, for this agenda item moving forward, I'd like to have a prepared report for you. I've discussed this with department heads on how I'd like to format that. I know you guys may be used to something of the past, but I'm hoping to have some leeway on it where maybe I can present something to you. And if you don't like the format, you don't like the setup, we can adjust it accordingly. But I hope to have something prepared for you in future meetings. And then lastly, to the governing body out there, I look forward to meeting you this Saturday at 10 a.m. For town meeting. So that's it. That concludes.
Okay, I have one question. Before Charlie left, we discussed a little bit about his contract situation that he might have with his change of status essentially. Will that be resolved in the near future?
We hope to have that completed in the next day or 2. Yes.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Sumner drives a hard bargain.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Are there any questions for the town administrator? Sorry. I'm getting used to saying town administrator rather than interim now, so.
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you and welcome aboard, and I appreciate you hitting the ground running the way you're doing it, so.
Thank you.
All right, topics for future discussion. Ms. Wilson?
So you, Ryan, with a few tweaks from me, you crafted a very detailed and I think good policy on personal conduct and civil discourse. And it was sent out, and some of the committees that got it weighed in. And I was just wondering if this is ever going to be voted on and put into place.
I hope so. I've been waiting for opportunities to get these items on an agenda.
I just know how hard it is to fit everything into the agendas.
I mean, there's that, and there's also the comprehensive financial policies, all 90 pages of them. So fun stuff. You'll be off the board by then.
I know.
So yes, I'll look for opportunities to get them on. I do my best to basically triage as to what has to get done immediately. Yeah. So any others?
Just a reminder that
The
business
building.
about my being a liaison.
Yep.
That'll be next.
Yeah, and I don't, Barbara has also requested basically some formalized liaison system for boards and committees from the select board. I'm not 100% sure if we'll get to that on the 28th, but we'll see. I'll work on it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I also would like to bring up that the 28th is when the goals are due. by members of the board. Yes, so basically the goals for the coming year. And you know,
Send you an example if you want. Of
Yep.
previous
don't send them mine.
Yeah.
It was so
Last
interesting,
thing,
but it
five
went,
of those.
yeah, it was like we
I'll
had,
send you Ryan.
Put them on Facebook.
No, mine's like 10 pages long.
I know.
So, okay. Rebecca, approval of minutes.
I'm running out of steam.
I know.
Not until you vote
Ryan?
on these, my friend.
Ryan?
Yep.
So the May 24th meeting was very important, and I had some amendments to offer. And the trouble is I couldn't write into what I could lift off, or I need a, yeah, because I couldn't, there were a few of them, and that was a very important, the whole shellfish part of it was very important. And I think that it would be good to have another shot, even if are we going to meet again after town meeting before I leave the board?
Yes.
Okay, so we could do them then?
So I actually have asked for an executive session that includes an part of open session.
Oh, yeah, the 17th.
Yep. I was really hoping to avoid to have a meeting between annual town meeting and the special election.
Well, I just, so I wouldn't be sitting here.
No, I just think everybody needs a little time off after that much work. So,
There is always, there will never be a let up with the,
well, we'll see what you say after town meeting.
I will be doing more work on something else that I don't want to do.
So what I'm hearing is that you're not ready to move on the minutes of the 24th, but the minutes of the April 26th, May 6th, and May 10th, we should move on tonight. Is that a fair summary? Okay, so I move to approve the minutes of April 26th, 2022, May 6th, 2022, and May 10th, 2022, as drafted.
Second,
Okay, can I have a roll call vote, please?
John, I.
Barbara, I.
Brian, I.
Michael, I.
Helen abstain.
Ryan, I. There's correspondence and vacancies. I kind of skipped over that. So Rebecca, have you managed to get a list of all the ones that are up for reappointment?
I'm working on that. Yes, there's quite a few.
Yeah, because they expired June 30th. So we'll have to have those on our 28th.
Yeah, I'm working, Jean had a list, so
Yep.
I'm investigating that list.
Yeah.
I'm working with that first.
Yeah,
There's a few.
And then use the list that Charlie generated for the special municipal employees, because that included some committees that weren't on Jean's list.
Okay.
So, all right. I think that's it for tonight. So I move to adjourn.
Helen, second.
John, I.
Barbara, I.
Brian, I.
Michael, I.
Helen, I. Thank you. Okay.